Okay, Kristen and Joe are online. Thank
Joe
you.
and Kristen on the line. I'm heading in.
Mr. Frederickson to give the word.
Ms. McKee, we're live.
Thank you, Mr. Frederickson, and good evening, everyone. This is March 24th, the Council Rock School District Education Committee meeting. I'll be chairing, and if we would go around and introduce ourselves, starting on my left.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Mike Shorbert, School Board. Ed Salomon, School Board.
Matt Frederickson, IT Director.
Hannah Pressman, Administrator on Special Assignment.
Sue Elliott, Substitute Superintendent.
Andy Shanko, Director of K-12 Education.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Yota Piley, School Board. And Mary Ann McKee, School Board. And on the line, we have, I believe, two members.
Yeah, Joe Hidalgo.
Kristen Martell, School Board.
Great. Thank you all very much. And we have a number of guests tonight in the audience. Thank you for being with us. While we only have two items on our agenda tonight, I would anticipate they're both going to generate a lot of discussion and perhaps questions. So what I'd like to do is run through our meeting on those two items, giving board members and administration ample opportunity for conversation, and then open it up to public if there is any public comment. I'm going to follow the good example from my colleague, Dr. Thorwart, and ask that should we have public comment, we're going to try and limit that to 3 minutes each tonight. Okay? Having said that, I think we're ready to begin. Dr. Elliott.
Thank you. So as Ms. McKee said, we have two agenda items tonight. Both of these items are discussion items, so neither are anything that we are asking the board to consider at this time for approval at the next board meeting. First is really continuing to look at how we're supporting student learning amid the pandemic and after, and we have some guests with us tonight that Ms. Pressman will introduce, and we'll get to know who those folks are in a minute. And then our second agenda item, we had back in January, the board had approved Cropper GIS to conduct another demographic study, and they will be with us tonight on the phone later this evening to present that study to the board for discussion as well. So I will turn it over to Ms. Pressman.
Great, thank you. Talking about supporting student learning amid and after the pandemic, we had three overarching questions that we'll be talking about this evening. The first one, what is happening at the building level? We have three principals from the high school, middle school, and elementary school. We have Jason Truskevich from North, we have Zach Bile from Newtown, and we also have Jill Kingston from Churchville. Also talking about what do our local data show. We have Rose Burkhead, who is our ELA curriculum coordinator, and we have Julie Eastburn, who is our math coordinator. They'll be talking about some of the data that we have for our students. And lastly, what do we need to continue providing support? This is going to focus on district-wide, what we're going to continue to do for our students and the support that we'll need in order to make them successful. First up, we have Jason Truskevich from North.
Sure. Thanks for having us this evening talking about such a really important topic. Really, at the high school level, I mean, we are continuously looking at data. In my particular role versus the roles of the assistant principals, each and every year we're looking at our mark reporting data, we're looking at final exam data, we're looking at AP data, Keystone data, and really getting a gauge of where the students are each particular year. Obviously, some of that data over the past couple of years we can't really utilize much, such as our final exam data from last year, midterm data, or even mark reporting, because there's just so many variables going on. So two of the big summative assessments that we were able to access this summer and this fall were our Keystone data and our AP data. Looking at our AP data, I'm going to talk about that particularly. Again, remember in 2020, the AP exams were done primarily online. Last year, there was different modalities of the virtual taking as well as the paper and pencil. And if you look at our data between 2019, 2020, and 2021, overall, you generally see the general trends of pretty much either being static, a slight increase. When I say slight, when I look at it, I'm talking like a 10th of a percentage point, 2 tenths of a percentage point, either direction. So really, AP data over the past couple of years has been pretty stable overall. Do we occasionally have an outlier? Absolutely. Some of our outliers are actually due to our sample size. So if you look at some of our AP courses in particular in art, we may have a sample size of 5 or 6 students in the high school, where some of the courses are So a difference of one student is going to have an impact change. But if we look over the years, you kind of see that balance. One area too, in the past year or so, we did see a change in one area, and we worked with that, but again, we knew there were some extenuating circumstances that were happening there. But again, we're looking at a population of a few hundred examinations, not 1,600 students. Now, when you dive into our Keystone data over the past couple of years, I think we're all very well aware that statewide Keystone data went down. That's far it's glaring. A lot of people have brought a lot of attention to what is going on. And speak about North in particular, we saw our biggest dramatic change in biology, which actually personally I'm kind of surprised. A, I was a science teacher at North for many years, but B, that's kind of like a standalone course in biology. Because if you think about literature, you think about math courses, they all build upon itself, but you go from generally your middle school science to biology. So again, obviously, the science teachers are really working with the students and building up their particular skills to be successful. In many cases, that's what it may be, the skills. So we think about what was taken out of last year's curriculum. There's a lot of that hands-on, interactive, laboratory-based exercises that would happen in a biology classroom. Looking at our literature scores went down, I think it was 1.5%. It's about 6 students in difference in one particular year. And again, that's something that we need to look at, because over the past couple of years, we have seen some slight changes in our literature scores, even pre-pandemic. But since that time, the scores are within, I think, 1.5 percentage points of North. And actually, algebra went up this past year on Keystone scores, which is kind of it's a nice surprise to have. But again, in all these cases, what we're looking at here is really just static decision points, static data points on the students. And again, it's such a summative assessment. So really to understand what's going on, the best gauge is really talking with the teachers. They are the ones who are with the students every single day. And they're really the ones that are putting together almost like an individualized learning plan for each particular student every single day. Everybody's world was upturned 2 years ago, and they've been flexible, they've adjusted multiple times. And in talking with staff members and coordinators, they're doing the same thing each and every day. The practices from 2 years ago aren't the same. That understanding of we know what the students are walking into the classroom each and every single day isn't there anymore. Because each student is at a different level based off of their experiences over the past 2 years. So what our staff is really doing, and this is happening in all the curricular areas, rather than having their students come in with that assumption, they're doing pre-tests. They're doing formative assessments to really check the students' understanding prior to teaching the new content. And again, it makes sense, but again, so much when the student is moving through such an amazing school system, you know what the students are coming in because you've taught them. You've taught these students for so many years. You know what they had in 9th grade, 8th grade, etc. But everything's been upturned. So that's happening a lot. And staff is working really individually with these particular students and saying, how can I catch them up? So there's this pre-teaching, there's reteaching, remediation that is happening in these courses prior to teaching the new content. And that's, again, it's a cyclical fashion that is happening throughout these departments. So the students are prepared, they have the general understanding they need to build upon their learning in their classes, and they're focusing on those priority standards, which were set, again, years ago pre-pandemic, that this is the essential content these students need to know in the classrooms currently, and once they walk out of their classrooms in June, in a new classroom in September. So teachers are really focusing on that, and that's a lot of work. I give them a lot of kudos for really adjusting very quickly and handling this. So a lot of good things that are coming out of this too is teachers are collaborating with each other. They're working together, their lesson plans, they're working together on these pre-tests. They're finding and redefining what those essential learning targets are. And they're talking about different ways in which they differentiate and share learning styles regularly throughout their department meetings and when they have curricular and professional development opportunities to kind of work with these students to keep them going forward. Now, obviously, by doing that additional learning in the classroom, it's taking time. We have 180 days, 155 minutes in each particular class period. We're not adding more to 180 days. We're not extending the school day to 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So obviously, the amount of instructional time directly is diminished somewhat. But what they're telling me, a number of department coordinators I have spoken with, is some of the additional add-on piece of literature they may not cover, but they're working on those skills of decoding, and understanding, and inference, and research, which they may not have gained over the past couple of years, that make certain they have those skills to be successful currently and going forward. Or in certain AP courses, they can cover some additional content that's out of the AP eligible curriculum. So that's kind of an aside when they do that after the test rather than sometimes they do it before the examination and the studying time. So they're covering the content. It's just certain pieces that they usually have covered in the past because we have one of the longest period of minutes in the entire state, 55 to 180. Certain things are coming out, but they want to make certain that these students are successful. And again, I give them a lot of kudos because it's taken a lot of time. Like teachers are devoting themselves. Some of them talking 18, 20 hours a day working on this stuff 7 days a week. So I give them a lot of props for doing this and making sure the kids are successful. Another thing that we are seeing, and we kind of seen an uptick this year at the high school, is just behavioral differences. You know, and I don't want to use the word juvenile, but some of the behaviors that we have seen are a little bit juvenile. You know, some students haven't been in the school building for a year and a half. So just that, again, that general understanding that we know expected behaviors when the student walks in, and we do roll assemblies and stuff like that, but when they haven't been in the building, those skills have been lost. Especially, I mean, a middle school is a huge transition time for students. Some of the students that we're seeing never really had that opportunity. So this year, so what we have seen an uptick in what we've always been a restorative practice, high schools, north and south, but we've seen an increase in that practice, in which we sit down with the student or students, an administrator, a staff member, and the family, and have a conversation about what the expectations are for students to learn. And it's not necessarily always the punitive nature. I mean, discipline comes from the word cycle, which means to learn or teach, you know? So we're teaching the students what is expected. And then it builds upon into that progressive discipline as we normally have. So there's been a lot more of that development happening in the administrative level, as well as even in the classroom level with teachers and the teaching assistants. Additional interventions too, at times we've had to actually get some additional support. A couple of times this year we've had, I won't say larger scale issues, but issues that involve a number of students. Dozen and a half students, and it's more of a relationship issue. So we've actually brought in the Peace Center to work with these students and hold their own restorative and have the staff kind of set aside. So the students were able to have an open dialogue and conversation with each other, and were able to speak freely without feeling they're going to be penalized for what they had to say because you have an administrator sitting in the room. And that was very, very successful in those situations. In particular, one student even came and said, we have a third session because we enjoyed it so much, having an opportunity to build that relationship. And those students we had the issues with in November and December, we're sitting together, and we haven't had issues in months, knock on wood. So that's one of the things that we have been doing to help develop students. You know, we brought in speakers to work with them, but again, this is continuous growth. And again, we've been flexible as well as the teachers have been flexible with certain things and being creative. I mean, I can talk about one administrator in particular. If a student has an after-school detention, they meet with the student beforehand about what their actions are going forward, checks the report card, see if they're struggling in any areas. When the student shows up with detention, they say, come with me, or you set up, you're going to clinic with a teacher X, Y, or Z. So it's kind of, again, not necessarily a punitive thing, but an advancement and development for each of the other students. Going forward, like I said, I'm a big guy about sense of community in our schools, and Mr. Funk and I have a discussion already about talking about different ideas going forward, such as growing a community at each high school, some type of advisory time or advisory period in which students have a particular staff member that they can work with over 4 years to kind of have a go-to, other than, you know, a big bad administrator or a counselor. It's a little more open conversation with those kids, and I'm hoping to see more of that in the future because I think that is important. That they have somebody to lean on, and in speaking with dozens, if not hundreds of students this year and families, that's something they miss too. They don't know the staff or who to go to, and this could be a nice little transition for the students coming up and finishing up their time here at the high school. So that's kind of what's going on here at the high school right now. Okay, so what's it, Mr. Bob?
I told him he could have a couple of my minutes.
There you go.
I'm going to mimic everything he just said as far as teachers being hard workers. I would say I came to this district a few years ago, and in the first week, I noticed that the teachers worked harder than anything I'd ever seen before. And I can say that today, when I walk around the building, when I can finally get out of my office for a moment, it is teachers working hard, working with students, doing whatever they can to make sure students understand. And at the end of the day, when they come in my office, they're asking me, what can they do? How can they do more? So I would mimic everything Jason said. I'm going to get a little bit deeper into what we have been doing. As far as recognizing student gaps right now, we have taken a look at PSSA data and CDT data. It's really the only two things that we're working on right now in the moment. As far as we got our PSSA data a little later, and I know Julie's going to talk about some of that. But using that data to see kind of where some of those gaps were and kind of focusing on those while we're in the classroom. Going deeper would be the CDTs. So CDTs have now been in middle school taken for English, science, and also language arts. And all those teachers meet with PLCs every 6th day, and we meet in the mornings and we go over data. And when we're looking at that data, we're looking at trends. So what do students understand? What do they need help with? And how can we maybe group students to focus on where their needs are? And those students who are excelling, what can we kind of give them to enrich them? There's amazing reports in CDT. I did promise Andy I wouldn't nerd out, so they're not on here, but I can send them out to you if you guys want. There's plenty of data where you can see exactly which question all your students got wrong, which a few got wrong, and you can use those as entrance tickets, exit tickets, which gets you into those formative assessments. When students walk into the building, I learned from Tim, who's a principal at Newtown Middle, to start looking at the positives from COVID and start looking at the positives from all this. And what you can find is every kid now has a computer. Usually it takes a few years. We did it in like 3 weeks. So every kid now has computers. When you walk in, I get instant data. I have an entrance ticket, the kid comes in, I give a problem on the board from what they learned yesterday, they complete it. While I'm taking roll, I can also look at which students got it right, which students got it wrong. Instead of sitting there for 20 minutes checking homework, now I have all the data that you understood and you did. And I can take a look at that and say, all right, you 17 students, you start on this. You 6 students, come with me real quick, let's review. And that's how you can start focusing and getting into the gaps. So this is something that I wouldn't say every single teacher is doing, but we're getting into the classrooms, we're working with it, and as teachers are using this and seeing that it's working, you're getting more and more to buy into it. And it's quick, it's easy, and it's data that you get immediately. I was just explaining some of the formative assessments, some of the Web 2.0 applications. Again, entrance tickets, exit tickets. Students leave with having a computer and getting instant data. You have that immediately to say, okay, tomorrow I can't move on to the next lesson because kids didn't get it. Or, hey, they got most of it, I might have to review a piece, and then I can move on. And I think that's really where we're going to start hitting those gaps. Getting to the behavioral piece, I would say the middle school, that's always a problem, the middle school students, right? So they're not fully developed, and they're trying to figure out where they belong, and trying to figure out who's their friend today, and who's not their friend tomorrow. So this has always been something that's extremely important to me, is the progressive discipline, talking to kids, and like Jason said, working with kids. Every single kid that comes into our office, I'll tell them, for Mr. Petty and myself, who primarily deal with discipline, we'll look at their grades. We'll pull in their counselor if there's a problem. We look at it as an opportunity. So when a kid's in my office, it's an opportunity. I don't know all 840 kids, and I swear every single day I walk down the building, I've never seen this kid ever. Where is this kid coming from? And it's every day you're just going, where are they? Where have these kids been? It's because you're never going to know all 840. So when kids in my building or in my office, it's an opportunity to connect, find out something about them. So when you see them later and you talk to them, you can find something. For me, I always find something that I can connect with and then look at their grades. And that just continues on a path of kids feeling comfortable where, yes, you may have come down because maybe you did something inappropriate, and maybe that you were a couple years behind because the last grade you fully had a year, is in 4th grade. So you're acting like a 5th grader, but you're in 7th grade. You have all this free time in the hallway, you have this free time in the cafeteria, you don't know what to do with it. You have to help teach them and guide them along the way. So really what we're doing, even in the classrooms, when we meet as team leaders, is talking about those things and working with those things. Just recently we had a team leaders meeting based upon, there's a lot of things going on social media. Obviously we had to send out communication to parents. We're working on those together, getting teacher inputs. What are they seeing in the classroom? If we can't control those, we're never going to get them on track, in the classroom as well, because they're too worried about what their neighbor is saying or what somebody said to them last night on social media. And if they can't get their head out of that, they're never going to learn anything. So with these two pieces, in my mind, are really both as important. Proactive using data, so all students that come that are referred, there's a quick little formula that we created where I can kind of pull things. So for instance, I'll tell you that 7th graders do better with their cell phones. I don't have as many 7th graders with cell phone violations. 8th grade, more cell phone violations. So when we talk to our 8th grade students, that is something that we might bring up. With our 7th grade students, if they're doing well, I'm not going to bring up that. Gumshoeing 7th graders. Unbelievably gumshoeing. And then just being flexible and creative. You know, we've come up with different creativity. I don't want to send kids home. I know sometimes, you know, Tim Petty and I talk about this a lot. They missed almost a year and a half or 2 years of school. Do I really want to send kids home? I don't. Sometimes, yes, it has to happen because there is a discipline that is what's needed. But coming up with creative things. Hey, you're going to stay in the office for a couple periods. We're going to work together. I'm going to find out what work you need. We're going to get you here, get you back on track, and then you're go home. You get picked up. Something to where there is a positive. Or hey, yeah, you might have to go home today. This would generally be a 2 or 3 day, but you're going to come in the next day. We're going to have all your work in here. We're going to find out what you need, and then we're going to make sure that when you leave, you're back on track when you come back. Just trying not to potentially keep kids out of the classroom. And that's the most important thing. And you know, sometimes discipline, that's what it is. I mean, you know, you're supposed to learn from it. So also, if a kid's continuing a pattern, I can't just keep giving the same discipline. We're going to have to learn to get creative about what we're going to do to get them to learn the process. Yeah.
I think you guys said it all already. I think you'll definitely see some comments after we talk about elementary schools as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with you all what's happening in our elementary schools right now. And this is our teachers have always done, and they've always been very good at their assessing students based on their assessing students who learn what their needs are. So where some of that starts with those initial assessments, those benchmark assessments, those common assessments that I know Liz and Julie are going to talk about in-depthly in a few minutes, the CBTs, the reading inventory, the DIBELs, those types of things that teachers give to get the foundation of where their students are. But more importantly, then they're moving into those ongoing formative assessments. And they're really focusing on those priority standards. What are those things that kids need to know and be able to do on the next grade level? So some of those are based on things like the Bridges Math program or the Journeys Language Arts program, just daily activities they're seeing in their classrooms, looking at observations and exit tickets, just any information they can get to see where students are. And then I think the most important piece then is we're meeting students where they are. And that's something our teachers have always done and done very, very well. And again, I give kudos to the excellent work our teachers continue to do to make sure they're meeting students where they are. So one of the ways we're doing that, obviously, is that we're using our assessments to drive our instruction. And we're using our PLCs to collaboratively plan that instruction based on the data that we have and based on the student needs. And again, teachers working very hard to do that. So with that information, some of the interventions that teachers are using, just differentiated instruction. In an elementary classroom, K to 6, we have students, just as you both spoke to, on all different levels. So it's really important that our teachers are differentiating the instruction, again, based on the assessment information they have. We're also using win time. So that what I need time that's built into our schedule, where teachers can really dive in and target those priority standards and what students might need more. And then, of course, we've got our supplemental reading and our supplemental math support. So for reading, we have supplemental support K to 6, and in math, we have the primary grades. I think one of the biggest things, and you both spoke to it and spoke to it well, we're definitely seeing a behavioral needs right now for our students in the elementary schools. We're definitely seeing some gaps there, and our teachers are really having to spend an increased amount of time just focusing on teaching those learning skills, those academic and behavioral skills that all kids need to have to be successful. And they're doing that, and they're doing it well, but we're spending a lot of time on that. Some of those things we're working on is just building stamina with kids again. Also helping students to self-advocate for themselves, helping with listening skills, some of those types of things that we're seeing more attention needs to be spent on right now. Also, just trying to return instruction in the classroom to that cooperative learning, that hands-on learning, that collaborative learning, versus looking at a screen and more independent work the kids have been doing over the last couple of years. And that takes time to build those routines back in, but we're seeing that's really helpful for our students. Of course, we also have our school-wide positive behavior support and intervention plan happening in all of our elementary schools in different ways. And that program is wonderful because it not only gives us a lot of data, but it also gives us instruction that we can give to our students and interventions we can provide for our students as well. And then, of course, our counselors at the elementary level have been critical, whether in meeting kids' needs, whether it's whole class lessons where we're seeing gaps, pulling small groups, or just doing one-on-one with kids who need a little bit more. Our counselors have been really important. So I think that's it for the elementary level. Thanks.
We're going to dive into curriculum.
I'm Rose Burkhead. So I'm just going to take us through I'm going to work high school down to elementary school, just because that's the order we went in. So at the high school level, we did modify exams. In 1920, when we shut down with the pandemic, no final was given. And then all instruction was asynchronous with only pass-fail grades that year. There was, once 2021 started, we did give a take-home essay to our students. There was more than 50% of students never attending a single day of school, so there was no way to administer a secure final objective exam at the end of the year last year. I'm happy to report that at the end of this year, we'll be going back to exams, and the English department plans to give both the in-class essay as well as the objective final exam. And nearly every student has attended school this year, so we're excited that everyone's back and we can actually give exams. So while we're shifting back to exams, our teachers at the high school level have noticed that our students need more time working through the priority standards. You're going to hear a lot of what Jason and Zach and Jill said. We've been working on the priority standards for so many years here, and we are seeing that work that we did before the pandemic is paying off, because we need to really make sure that we're focusing on these priority standards. So we're changing the way we give homework assignments. Sometimes in the academic level, we're reducing the assignments. We're also using class time to really actively engage with our students, especially during independent reading. You know, if they're reading a novel, it's really important that we're checking in with the students and making sure that they are engaged and understanding whatever it is that they're learning. So there's a lot of digital resources teachers are using to make those check-ins. GoGuardian is one of them. There's other resources that we use. Students are on their computers, and then teachers are able to connect with them in a non-threatening way. For some students, raising the hand in class and saying, hey, I don't understand, it's not working. So students have the chat feature and are able to connect with teachers that way, and it's almost like no one knows who's receiving help, which I think is a really great thing. As we move on to the middle level, we are utilizing priority standards to gauge growth. Students who are currently in 7th and 8th grade were in 4th, 5th, 6th grade at the start of the pandemic. And this means that they never really had experience with novel instruction. So when our English teachers are taking out novels and giving novels to our students, they've really never had practice with that before, and holding on to a book and learning how to really dig deep through a book. So that is something that's taking a long time to get kids ready to read, understand, inference, and analyze. Those skills are very high level. We want to make sure that our kids are understanding that. Our teachers are collaborating and working diligently to create structured lessons that engage students and help them to grow. But it does take time to do that. And it takes time, especially at the middle level, to gain trust with students and to tell them, no, this is going to work for you. We're working for you. We're working collaboratively for you. So that buy-in does take time. At the start of the school year, as Mr. Vile mentioned, we did give the CDTs. And the CDT is a test. It is actually given by DRC, which is part of the overall assessment program from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It's very important to note that students are measured on end-of-the-year expectations on this test. So even though the test was given in the fall, it's being measured on end-of-the-year expectations. So we're not really expecting in any given year that all students are proficient at the start of the year. The purpose of this assessment is to help teachers identify areas of strength and need. Students in 7th grade take both the reading literature assessment and the writing English composition assessment. The reading literature assessment is taken in literacy class. The writing English composition is taken in English class. And as you can see, our reading literature data shows 65.3% of students are proficient, and on the writing English composition in 7th grade, 62% are proficient. So That's the beginning of the year. We're going to be looking at, we'll give the test again and we can compare beginning of the year and end of the year at a later time. Our 8th grade students only take the writing English composition test in English class. So in this data, 62.4% of our 8th grade students are proficient at the start of the year. So I think that's good information, and we're expecting to see growth when we give the test again in the spring. Okay. The reading inventory is another piece of data that's used at the secondary level to track student lexile levels. The reading inventory is predominantly used with IEP students in 7th and 8th grade. They have been identified as reading below grade level and likely were identified as students who were reading below grade level prior to the pandemic. Those students are enrolled in a Read 180 class, and the data shows that this population is making growth. The increased number of test takers in 9th grade accounts for the students who take strategies to improve reading in the high school. These students also use Read 180 on a regular basis for their reading instruction, and then they are making gains in their reading progress. Even though we have experienced some deficits at the middle level, it's clear that we are making really strong gains in literacy. And we're moving on to elementary. So our elementary schools also use the priority standards. We're focusing on foundational skills at the elementary level, which include concepts of print, phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition, and fluency. In addition to the foundational skills, we're actively measuring comprehension through curriculum assessments. Our elementary teachers have done an incredible job to meet students where they are and continue to help them grow. The reading inventory, again, this is given at the secondary and the elementary level. In this case, we give it to all students in grades 3 through 6. Students take the assessment 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end. And this chart shows the students' average initial lexile levels and the average lexile level as of January 2022. I've also included in the last column the proficient lexile band for each grade level. Student growth on this assessment takes place at different rates depending on where they initially score on the test. So it's not a set, we're going to grow 100 points this year. It's different based on how they start the test and how they finish. The average score for every grade has improved since the start of the year, and all the current averages are falling within the proficient lexile band, which again shows growth for us. Okay, the next several graphs are box whisker plots from our DIBELS data. This will allow us to view data from previous years in relation to this school year. DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. Again, this assessment is administered 3 times a year, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Our first box whisker plot shows kindergarten letter naming fluency scores. According to this chart, our students are performing around the same average rate as 2019. There was a dip in the data in 2020, but we have rebounded. The second box whisker plot shows phoneme segmentation fluency subtest scores. This test asks students to break a word into individual sounds. This is a very difficult skill for kindergarten students, but it is critical to reading development. Our students are below the suggested range here, but are making progress. Again, we're scoring around the same level as 2019. As we move to first grade, we can see the progress students are making with nonsense word fluency. This test helps teachers to understand how students are applying phonics patterns to words that are not real. Our students are slightly below where they were in 2019, but they are bouncing back from the lower 2020 scores. Our first graders are in the average range on this subtest. And lastly, our second grade oral reading fluency scores. This test is directly related to how students practice reading continuous text. While we're below our 2020 scores, we are still falling within the average range. Students have made progress in this area since the beginning of the year. In summary, it is my hope that this data helps support the fact that our students are making progress this year. thanks to the hard work of every single person involved in the learning process. The pandemic has caused us to shift our focus and use different methods to reach our students and guide them to new levels. While we want to forge ahead and teach on grade level, there are standards that need to be in place and strong before we forge ahead. The foundation must be solid to foster development, and when it's not, it is essential that we rely on our priority standards to guide us through the levels. So, next up is Julie. Can I help you with that?
Yep, I'm good.
All right.
Hi, I'm Julie Eastburn. I'm the district math coordinator, and I'm going to talk about math through our years. So starting in the high school level, we did for this school year, we did have, I guess during the pandemic, we did not have finals that first year when we first closed down. Last year, what we did was during our in-service time, we had teachers write 4 to 5 questions from our priority standards, and then at the end of the year, teachers chose from those priority standards for the finals that they were going to give. We started this year, and we decided at our opening in service that we were going to wait and see how students were progressing. Now that we had most of them back in the classroom, we were going to wait and see how they were progressing, what kind of skill deficits and strengths they were showing. And it quickly became apparent that putting the restriction of, you need to be at this point by a midterm in January was putting too much pressure on students because there were lots of skills that needed to be reinforced before we could move forward. So we decided to not have midterms this year, but we still will be giving our finals. And we spent, I guess before that, in November, so around November in service, we actually spent time, we divided teachers into grade groups or course groups, and we had the teachers look at what the priority standards are and what prerequisite skills students needed to be successful in their Algebra 2 class. And then teachers designed warm-ups, exit tickets, all kinds of just small little snippets of those prerequisite skills and populated them in the Canvas. We have a math Canvas course, populated in the Canvas course so that teachers could pull from them to allow students to practice those prerequisite skills. We've gotten to the point where we feel that we are ready to give finals as they were written. In February, during that in-service time, we had teachers look at the finals that we gave back in 2019. And because we have done so much work with priority standards over the years, and recently we aligned all of our finals to our priority standards, teachers feel like they're getting to the point where they will be able to cover most of the priority standards of the course. So teachers have the ability to look at it as a group, not individually, but as a group, to look at those exams, decide, is there something on the exam that we know we're not going to get to? Like linear programming in Algebra 2 is always a hot topic, and that's a topic that we have at the end of the year. The teachers, it's not a necessary skill that the students need going into analysis, so that's something that was going to be taken off the final, and then we use questions from our midterm we are then going to put onto the final. But in most cases, I haven't gotten all of the finals back, they're not due until May. But in most cases, it's really 3 or 4 questions that are changing. It's not the large part of the course that's changing. And really what we're asking teachers to focus on is priority standards and remembering that we're teaching students, we're not teaching content, we're not covering content, we're actually teaching students the content of mathematics. So there has been some slowing down in pacing, and that's okay, because if you can't factor from Algebra 1, you're not going to be able to factor in Algebra 2. So allowing teachers to have that time to slow down and reteach some of the skills that some students may not have mastered has proved to be beneficial for teachers. So at the middle school level, we've done the same thing. We've looked at what our priorities are, what's important for kids to know in each course. And we have also slowed down the pace there because we know that there's students that don't have all the necessary background information. So while this data can look a little shocking when you first look at it, we have been giving CBTs during the school year, and you'll see that when we gave the CBT in the fall, based on end of year standards that all students are supposed to master by the end of the year, we had 46.9% of our students proficient on those skills. And when, in 8th grade, when we gave numbers and operations in the fall, we had 29% of the students proficient already on skills that don't need to be mastered till the end of the year. And this gave teachers information on what it is that they need to slow down and look at, and as Zach had talked about before, looking at those reports and seeing what kind of remediation is necessary. So we also give benchmark assessments at the middle level, and it's kind of been a balance this year between the benchmark assessments and the CDTs, and making sure that we're allowing time for instruction and not taking too much time away from instruction to assess. The nice thing about the benchmark exams is it usually covers a unit. For example, the benchmark for 7th grade, the first benchmark was ratios and proportions. So it was assessing ratios and proportions. And what you can see from the data is that the first number, I'll look at 7th grade because that's what I started talking about. Currently this year when we gave that test, we had 62% of the students that were proficient or advanced. And the number in parentheses is from pre-pandemic 2019, 2020. So you can see that Math 8 is definitely having a struggle, and Math 8, it was the number system, which kind of makes sense because it's rational numbers, it's operations with integers. Those are just tough concepts. They're first introduced in 7th grade. That's the first time students are introduced to operations with signed numbers, and that's a challenging concept for students to understand, particularly addition and subtraction with integers. So that was something that the 8th grade teachers knew that they had to go back and reinforce and give students more practice with, because they really weren't feeling comfortable with those skills yet. And in our honors courses, we only give a middle of the year and an end of year assessment. And part of the reason why we do that is, number one, our honors 7th grade math course is now an accelerated course. It combines both the 7th and 8th grade standards into 1 year. So that's a lot of curriculum for students to have to master. So, and that's to allow them to be ready for Algebra 1. So because of that, we try not to slow down too much and slow down instruction. And as you can see, our honor students are performing pretty much around the same levels as they did pre-pandemic across the board. So in elementary math, we have in our Bridges program K-5, we have at the start of every Bridges unit, they have a unit screener that Bridges has provided since the pandemic, and the nice thing is it's usually only 5 to 10 questions that students complete, and it's the prerequisite skills that students need to be successful in that unit. So it's not assessing the skills in that unit, it's actually assessing, do they have the prerequisite skills to be successful? And when they find a group of students that don't have those skills necessary, they're then able to use some activities and instruction to help bring students up to pace on those skills, because they can't be successful in the Bridges unit, in that unit, if they don't have those prerequisite skills. So some teachers have used them as a way to pull small groups, and then if they see in a large class, that most of the kids in the class are struggling with this concept, then they can provide that remediation in a large group. So that's what our unit screeners are. We also have universally screened all of our first, second, and third graders in the DIBELS. We use the computation probes, and then we use easy CBM, which is curriculum-based measure, to look at their computation. So it gave us a good picture of how students were doing, which students were struggling and needed some remediation in the primary grades. We've also this year asked teachers to give the number corner assessments as they're written, and then we also this year have included the, I'm sorry, I have it backwards. We asked them to use the Bridges assessments as written, which is what we did last year, and then this year we added in the number corner assessments. And the purpose of the number corner assessments is to assess students' long-term retention. And some of the questions are meant to be formative, some are meant to be summative. So some questions are meant to give teachers information on, okay, this group of students has already mastered this, or this group of students hasn't mastered this. So that's just a good picture of long-term retention for students. And then we've also given the CDTs, and I'll show you some of the data. So I'll start with the CDT data. You'll notice that in third grade we gave the full CDT. The CDT in math can take sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours. Some students that not necessarily are slow, but they're meticulous learners, and they really need to get every question right, and they need to work really hard. Sometimes it takes those students a really long time. So we chose overall not to give the full CDT at the beginning of the year, except for third grade, because we used the third grade beginning of the year CDT to help us identify those students who are showing mastery of our curriculum, who then we need to investigate further and see if math enrichment is a good placement for them. So at the beginning of the year, and I know the number looks a little shocking, we had basically 22% of our students that were proficient in third grade curriculum. And my guess is that those students that were proficient were then moved on to testing for math enrichment. But it also gave teachers good data on what some of the gaps in our learning were. And this year teachers also had training on specifically on how to use the CDT data to inform their instruction, so that helped them better dig into how to use this data. Along the way, we've given the algebraic concepts to our fourth graders, and you'll see that in the fall, after a little bit of instruction, the way that our math curriculum is set up, it's called distributed practice. So students get, I guess the easiest way, the kindergarten example is usually the easiest way. By the end of kindergarten, all students need to be able to count to 100. But you don't expect that in September all students can count to 100. So you assess, can students count to 10? And then in December, can they count to 20? So you kind of build that along the way. So the way our curriculum is set up is students get to continually go back either through the bridges instruction or through the number corner instruction to continually practice those skills so that mastery is attained by the end of the year. And it's not that they're practicing, how to count to 100 and then we don't touch it again until the end of the year. So it really gives students a chance to learn that. So after, in the fall, which was October, the end of October, the beginning of November, we assessed students on algebraic concepts in fourth grade, and we had 60% of our students were advanced or proficient at that time. We assessed numbers and operations also in grade 5, and at that point in the very beginning of the year, we saw that before the end of the working period, we had 45.5% of our students proficient. And in algebraic concepts in 6th grade, we saw that after we had given some information, some instruction on algebraic concepts, that we now had 58% of our students, knowing that we're going to continue to practice these skills, but knowing that we're on the road to mastery by the end of the year. We also have our number corner assessments that I talked about, and these are assessments that students take 4 times a year. And these are the percent of students that are advanced or proficient. And the nice thing about the number corner assessments is they focus on the priority standards of the course. So you'll see that as we're moving through, students are making progress towards mastery of the priority standards of the course. And we have data to show that. We do see in 5th grade that there was a little bit of a drop. And kind of alarmed me a little bit, so I went and looked, and from what I saw, there were more questions on the second number assessment that were still formative. Fraction instruction had kind of started in 5th grade, but it hadn't really had the full force of the 4 operations with fractions, and so students were assessed on that to kind of see where they were with that, knowing that mastery was not meant to be at that point yet. Mastery isn't supposed to be until I think it's the third number corner assessment. So that's the elementary, middle school, high school math.
So, one of the, in previous meetings, one of the things that, as a board that you've asked us is, well, what do we need? What do we need to help? What do we need to continue to do for our students? So, in meeting with several administrators and teacher coordinators, so some of those who are here tonight and some others, the feedback that we've gotten really is we just need time. Our kids need time. And the impacts of this pandemic, both academically and socially and emotionally, are just going to take some time for our kids to recover from. And that's something that we will continue to work on. And as you've heard, the work that our teachers are doing is they're constantly making changes. They're looking at where their kids are, they're meeting their needs, they're adjusting instruction, they're working with kids extra time, they're trying to figure out how can I really help our students. Additionally, when we think about time, and you've heard the principals mention this, our staff need time to review data, plan, and support, and they're taking advantage of those opportunities when they have that to sit and work collaboratively and look at the data that they have on kids and think about how do we help them, how do we develop activities collaboratively together that we can all use to help our students. And as you heard from all three principals, our students need time to learn how to learn. And we need to be cautious of the balance between pushing to get back to where we were before with academics and keeping student wellness in mind. Our kids have gone through 2 years of something that they've never experienced before, and a lot of changes to their school life as well as their home lives. And so we need to be careful that we're not pushing kids too hard and causing increased stress and anxiety, while at the same time continuing to support their needs. In addition to time, we've talked a little bit before about possible staff needs that will help us. And we continue to evaluate those staff needs as an administrative team and at the cabinet level. But some of the possibilities that have been shared before, possibly some additional special education teachers for some of our students who need some additional supports. An additional math specialist. I believe you heard Ms. Kingston talk about we provide math remediation in grades K, 1, and 2, and 3, I believe, but not 4, 5, 6, because we don't have enough staff to be able to do that. So adding a math specialist to help with that. I've mentioned to the board as well, we need some more English language support. We've had an increase since December in the number of our students who qualify as English language learners, and more than half of those students that have joined us qualify as beginning language learners, which means they speak little to no English. And they are across the K-12 spectrum. We've got kids in elementary, middle, and high school. And so imagine if you're a high school student coming into high school classrooms, you speak no English, and you're having to engage in a science class or an English class or a math class. So we need some additional support from our English language area to really support those students who have more significant needs because of the fact that they are learning English as another language in addition to trying to learn academics. Additionally, some of the initiatives that we've been exploring and working on and discussing with the board in other committee meetings will help us to meet those needs. So when we look at the possible revisions to our elementary schedule, we've talked about the need for social emotional learning and student wellness. So by revising our elementary schedule, we can dedicate time in the schedule to make sure that we can provide specific time for continuing to support our students' social and emotional learning. You've heard Ms. Kingston talk about the win time or what I need time, making sure that we're dedicating time for that in the day so that teachers have that dedicated time to meet students' specific needs based on what their local data and their daily assessments are telling them. And then, of course, additional planning opportunities for our teachers to analyze data and plan instruction and intervention. And the addition of that fifth special, while the fifth special itself is not necessarily meant to address a learning need from a perspective of a gap that our students might have, it's addressing a need that we have from a curricular perspective. But the added bonus of that is that time of that fifth special is going to give our teachers some additional time to meet collaboratively and plan and think about how do we meet kids' needs. At the secondary level, we're looking at, with the shift of the RA period to the end of the day, really targeting that time to be able to focus on second chance learning. So kids have been in school all day, and teachers then at the end of the day have an opportunity to check in with kids. And as you know, as Mr. Weil talked about, middle school, there's a lot that they're going through and trying to understand, and it's a very unique time in their development. So having that time at the end of the day to check in with kids who maybe need a little bit more help with organization, how to plan for doing your homework that night, or let me help you get a start on your homework. Let me make sure you understand this concept so that when you go home tonight, you'll be okay with it. Or let me reteach this to you because I don't think you quite got it today in class. So that second chance learning at the end of the day will really help to send kids home with some additional support, as opposed to at the beginning of the day where it's, did you have any trouble? I tried to do my homework last night and I didn't know what I was doing. Well, now let's try to see if we can help you out. So it's shifting that focus. As Mr. Truskevich mentioned, we're exploring how can we use something like an advisory period at the high school to build those connections so that our high school students have somebody in the building, an adult that they can connect with when they have questions, when they need support. And of course, we use clinic both at the middle school and the high school level, and I know that many of our teachers, we have clinic on designated days. Many of our teachers are seeing kids for clinic outside of those designated days. They're seeing kids after school all the time to help them. So when it comes to the needs, those are the three main areas, with time, professional or support staff, and then also looking at our schedule provisions that will really help us to continue to do the good work that our teachers are already doing to support students. So Ms. McKee, I believe that ends our information that we wanted to share relative to this first agenda item.
That's terrific. I really appreciate everyone. I appreciate taking the time and being with us tonight, and what you presented I think was very helpful. I'd like to open it now. Any board questions or comments? We've got the experts here. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Marcel.
No, it's okay. I have a few questions and comments. Could we go to the slide with the reading inventory for elementary students? So I was, sorry. No,
I didn't realize it was so far back.
That was a while ago. And before I go through questions, just thank you to everyone for being here and just spending time on this. I know that you have a lot to do already, and we're not looking to give more to you, but I just think it's really helpful to hear from you, and thank you so much for just coming and spending the time today. I really appreciate it. So in terms of this slide, I was just trying to understand, so from grades 3 to 6, we have some, is it correct that we have some students that are below basic and some that are basic? Like, can you just explain the bands that they're in?
So I took the average score for each grade level. I can send you, like, we can look at advanced, proficient, basic, below basic, 5 grade level. We could break that down. But I thought for broader strokes to look at an average level.
So is it generally that what we're looking at for these averages that we're looking at, like, that most kids are proficient, like in that grade, proficient to proficient?
Yes.
Okay. And so really the change in the lexile is within that band. Is it typical to see growth, like, from proficient to advanced, like in terms of that average? Like,
it can be. There's, in this assessment, there's like a growth measure. So if you score a 500 at the beginning of the year as a 3rd grader, they have a growth indicator that will tell you by the end of the year this student should score a 600. Okay. We'll use basic numbers. And they will show you, and they will break it down for you, how close each student is on their growth level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's helpful to see it. It's just something, for me at least, it's kind of like a new way of looking at.
Yes, it's difficult to understand.
Just make sure, like, if someone from the community was trying to kind of understand the bands, I think that's a helpful explanation, so thank you. And then for the secondary slide, which was it right after? Right before, thank you. So for secondary, it seemed like there was more of, and this one is a smaller number of students.
Correct.
So in some of the cases, it seemed like maybe, I don't know, It seemed like there was growth from below basic to basic.
Yes.
Was that 9%?
So the ninth grade, there's 110 students that took that test in ninth grade. And their starting average score is 883, which is in the basic or below basic range. And then their average is in 914, again, falling in the basic range. But these are students that we've identified as below grade level readers. And we're looking at growth. We want to capitalize on the fact that they are growing. They're not staying where they are. They are growing. But they're not necessarily making it into the proficient range quite yet.
But they're making growth, which is great. So, so kudos to those teachers that are doing that. So thank you.
You're doing an awesome job.
Yeah, that's great. And then the other question I was wondering, so this is January 2022, and obviously the PSSA scores, which would only cover for the grade, came out. So is there a certain amount of time that it takes to then see if some of those students would potentially kind of fall into that next group, essentially, that would need more help from an intervention standpoint? Like, is that something that you would look at for next year? Like, I just don't know, like, from a cycle perspective, like, we're looking at where we're at now. Yeah, like,
to be in that course.
Exactly, like, is that something where you would look at a bunch of different data points and grades and things like that from now through the end of the year for next year? I'm just trying to think of the time frame.
We start the process of planning for courses in December and January for 8th grade going into 9th grade. And we look at all kinds of scores. We look at CDT, we look at PSSA, we look at how they're doing in class. We have a HMH growth measure test that they take in 8th grade if they're in a reading course. And we work as a team to collaborate. We actually ask the high school to look at our data as well to make sure that we're making informed decisions for moving into strategies.
So if there was an additional need, let's say to add the number of students getting intervention and help in this area, you would know that later this year so that if we were trying to plan from a budgetary perspective, that we would have a sense of what you would need by then?
I mean,
like if you needed more staff.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think about it in terms of the
Yeah.
budget and planning.
So what we've already started looking at, and I know, Jason can speak to this, we've already begun looking at staffing needs and looking at the high school level and the middle school level, and looking at what course assignments and things people will need to teach. So while, we might need more sections of strategies for reading, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to hire another teacher. It just might mean that we're shifting what courses someone is teaching, and you can probably speak to it so much better than I
So,
can.
I can speak, about our 9th and 10th grade students that generally are identified here. We did a longitudinal study about 4 or 5 years ago, and we looked at students because we saw the dip in our 10th grade literature keystone exams. Through our analysis, we determined that a number of the students that may have been in like an LRC class and stayed in the LRC program didn't necessarily reach the proficient level. The students that entered the reading and writing workshop actually were able to kind of make that threshold to get into the proficient. And as numbers increased, we added more supports over the past couple of years, and rather than having an English teacher with a reading specialist and a teaching assistant, we have now at North and South of the 9th grade and 10th grade programs have now a code talk model. So you have a teacher, reading specialist, certification teacher, as well as additional working in a writing lab, working with these students to kind of build them up. And again, in increase in 9th grade, if I remember correctly, any student that is new to the district coming in as 9th grade is tested as well. So we see deficits there, and you see a bigger number. It's clear a number of students in the reading writing workshop program have increased over the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, we've seen growth. But with these changes in the program, as you can see there, as they get into 11th and 12th grade, the numbers start to decrease a little because they are getting to the level of grade level. As Dr. Elliott said, yes, in certain cases, we may have an additional section, a reading and writing workshop, generally because it is a smaller class size, generally capped at 20, with 2 staff members there, with 2.125, and when it gets specific, 2.125, and when it gets specific, more information we need to know. But it really does help those students. But again, that increases what we've done to make changes to the academic English style program. identify the students that may not need as many support, so that now as a teaching assistant, so the teaching assistant in the pre-workshop program, because we have the academic inclusive 9, there's your balance there. But again, obviously how numbers fall can always be a decrease in section.
It's a very helpful
There
explanation.
you go.
So thank you, I appreciate it. And then the last is more just like a request / comment. So my son is in first grade and gets reading support. And so I've been taking a lot of time looking at his like Dibble scores and things like that. And so I was wondering if, not for tonight, but just at some point, if I could see like the composites instead of like just the subsets, just because I just think it's interesting. And I've been, again, from looking at it from a first grade perspective, but I've been trying to learn more about it to be a better mom, but to, also from a school board perspective. So it's interesting to see them in there. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Mr. Hickey.
First of all, I appreciate all the time that you guys have spent, not only here tonight, but doing what you do, and to the teachers as well. One of the things I'd like to see, which is unfortunately is going to probably ask to take up more of your time, and maybe I'm new, so you do it anyway, but as opposed to maybe seeing you once a year, as maybe we could see like progress reports throughout the year as opposed to like something we see in September and then something we're going to see now in March. There is, one of the things that I've been seeing and you guys have pointed out is you have a couple of different problems. You have the academic learning loss and the social and emotional. And a lot of people said to me, you can't have the one without the, if the kids aren't emotionally ready to learn, then they're not going to learn, or they're not going to learn as they should. So like I said, I appreciate all that, they're done, but like I said, hopefully we can see some, since you have seen the dip in the scores and what has happened, maybe we could see some progress going forward, like a periodical progress report, maybe not necessarily from the same people, but from maybe different department heads or whatever. The other question that I had is, as you looked at like the PSSA and Keystones, not only were the scores lower, like one of the things that I noticed, and maybe I'm wrong, somebody can please correct me, is there seemed to be a difference within the district as opposed to compared to outside the district. And I'm just wondering, I think it was Jason that you had mentioned that you do certain strategies at North where you do like a pre-assessment to see where these kids are in certain subjects. And before we go on, some kids will go on and other kids might have some remedial work. Is that consistent from north to south or south to north, or if there's strategies that are working in one area or one school, are we trying to implement them same strategies that are working in other schools, whether it be at the elementary, the middle, or the high school? I don't know, are we doing that, or everybody just kind of does their own thing? And
I would say there's a lot of collaboration that does occur, and again, speaking with I spoke with the department coordinators in North prior to this, a lot of the conversation came up with planning, in which, in particular, these two ran the workshops in November and February, in which the secondary level was collaborating and working together, and putting together strategies for all of those students. So there is some to that point, in a certain extent. We are limited in cross-building professional development opportunities, and it's just based off of the schedule that we are limited with that at times. But there's still always some communication going on, and what I mean by that is when we talk about our district professional development days. We have building days as well as district days.
I would say any time that curriculum coordinators have in-service time, it's always north and south, or all middle schools, or groups of cross-building elementaries working together. And at the secondary level, we also have meetings with, there's department chairs at for each subject, each department, and we as coordinators meet with them. Depending on the issue, sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's bi-monthly, but it's always with people, the coordinators from both buildings, both high schools or both middle schools, always meeting together to share and discuss and work out the issues that we have.
yeah, like I said, I would just like to see some of those, not that I would like to see numbers decline, but I would like to see those numbers kind of be closer together. And as I said, I don't know if, the strategies are being same, like something that's working at South, a particular strategy in a particular subject are we communicating that to the same people at the northern end of the district and vice versa? And like I said, and thanks for all your time, and like I said, I know it's been a real difficult time, and hopefully we can start making some progress.
Dr. Tolbert?
I want to thank you for coming out, and I want to thank you for acknowledging there was learning loss. I'm going to hammer that repeatedly, because if you ask me to close the school again, I'm coming after you. We're not closing schools with hurt kids. And I just want to comment also that the learning loss continues. It's not over. We're still depriving kids of learning opportunities because you're trying to catch up. You said it yourself, the biology scores went down. Those kids will never take biology again in Council Rock. So we're not filling that bucket for them. I heard a lot of priority standards. I got to believe that's a subset of all of our standards, and in which case we didn't hit all of our standards, and we won't this year at all. And I'm driving this home for a reason. It's not because you're not working hard. It's because we need to get back to the standards we have. So I hear more time, more time, more time. Every minute we don't teach kids, they've lost something else. So I need to drive that home, that you know, these kids lost a lot. If you are a 9th grader this year, you didn't get middle school at all. You didn't get middle school. And COVID didn't do that, our reaction to COVID did that. So that has to, we have to be careful moving forward, because this wasn't good. I appreciate that things are moving in the right direction. When it comes to data, I will ask our curriculum coordinators, you got to give me a baseline. If you give me today, but don't give me yesterday, it's meaningless. I need the old data. Without, an inch doesn't mean anything until you have a ruler in your hand. And so I need that. So, and I'm asking for that. I'd like you to come back. You studiously avoided PSSA scores, and I could spend a day with you talking about some of the striking PSSA scores in there. So, and what are we going to do about it? Because again, these kids are not going back. They're not retaking grades. We don't get another chance to fill these buckets, and we need to really think about that. So, enough of my comments. I have only one question. For every 12 kids you have that need support and need help catching up, you probably have 4 that are already there. What are you doing with them? Because they need opportunities as well. So what are you doing with them? Is a question for you as a group. I don't care who answers it, but.
I'll start, because I think some of it is that entrance and exit piece of having students come in and seeing where they're at. And I mean, I mentioned if you have 17 kids who need extra support, a group of 5 might be on level, and then you have a group of 5 or 6 that potentially are, need that enrichment. And I'll say, I mean, I know at the middle school, we provide enrichment when other students are getting remediation. So in that sense, for those kids that are on level, I mean, we've added, an extra math section of algebra 1 in 7th grade. We're going to have 2 sections of algebra 2 in 8th grade, which we only had 1 last year. So those students who are on and above, or at least at the middle school level, they are afforded some opportunities. We've gone from 2 sections of honors in 7th to 3 sections of honors in 7th. So I mean, identifying them, absolutely. And I think when there is the learning loss, and even some of the needs were in areas of students like special ed or students with English as a second language, those are students that are going to struggle the most because of missing time. We have kids, at the high school, I don't want to speak for you, but we had a little short conversation prior. An AP student is a good learner. An AP student is a student who was probably able to learn on their own and do well on their own, so those scores probably aren't going to suffer as much. So I think for those kids, we provide what we can, and it's not at a loss or a deficit because we're doing remediation together.
I'm more concerned at the lower levels, because they're going to diverge very quickly here. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't know if you can, unless you hold them all back, which is not the right answer.
And I think that's where, as an elementary teacher, a first grade classroom is very typical of that. You know, we have children coming in at all different levels. So I think our teachers naturally, through professional development, through the curriculum and the programs that they have, are able to differentiate that instruction and meet students at those different levels. We might have 3 or 4 different groups. Reading's a perfect example of where teachers are pulling students into level reading groups and meeting them at that point what they need. Our win time, that what we need time, what I need time, we keep mentioning, I think is really important for that as well. And that's where some are getting remediation at that point, others are getting enrichment during that time. And I also think it's part of elementary assignments and activities. Teachers are good at making those assignments flexible and giving choice so that students, again, can tap what they need. I think our elementary teachers just are very good at doing that and trying never to just hit it from the point.
I got a couple.
Yeah, Mr. Salmon?
Yeah, good evening, and thanks again for coming out tonight. You guys can take off tomorrow. By the time we get out of here, I wish I could take off. A lot of good stuff said tonight, and we all know where we've been. We're not using work every day. What solution are we going to come up with moving forward? And I think that's the baseline for me right now, because our AP learners are always going to learn at AP levels for the most part. It's the kids in the middle that I'm always worried about. And if Denise Brooks was here, she would talk about, and we all agree, that Council Rock has a very distinguished and certain path that our kids go through, and it's kind of developed around 5th and 6th grade, goes into your middle school, and then by then, they jump into our high schools. So my concern is the wide-ranging question, I don't need an answer tonight. I think things have changed, and I think, Mr. Tiggy, you mentioned it, you may have to add extra classes that we've never had before at the 9th grade level to start addressing. That road is very tight, has always been very tight in Council Rock. I think the road's going to become wider, so I want us to be mindful that it's not the same Council Rock that we've had, it's not the same learning atmosphere, that I think we need to be creative and come up with solutions, because I think the middle of the road kids, I'm not being disparaged about those kids, I think that number's bigger now. And whatever that number is, that's our goal, to shrink and to adjust. But I don't think moving forward we do what we've always done. I think we have to look at this year as a benchmark year. And next year, I'd like to hear about what staffing we need, what different ideas are in place. I have a lot of notes here, and we're hard on time. What's the role of the counselor? How deep is counseling going? Discipline, I know, is a big deal in our schools. I deal with it every day. I'd like to hear about how Holly Woodward's work at North and why she's being recommended or in the list of the top teachers in our state. It's a tremendous program that she's putting there. Can that be done elsewhere in the district? We spend a lot of time on testing. How much time is that taking away from learning? So these are some of the questions I have, but I think collectively as a board, as a community, we have to think about these kids moving forward, and that it's not going to be business as usual moving forward. How do we get creative? How do we come back to the board when we talk about budgets, when we talk about resources, and produce a plan that's going to take Council Rock into the future? So that's the challenge from Ed to you guys. I have 2 kids in the school. I watch it every day. They're struggling, just like the kids I see every day at work. We're all struggling. But I think until we become a community again and start thinking about the word solution, all this is great. We have to find a solution. So you have my support moving forward. I said it in November, whatever you need from this board financially within reason. I think we're ready to move forward, because we only have one chance to educate our kids. So let's do this. And it's time. With everything we've been through, it's time to refocus on the children. So thank you for coming out. You guys are doing a great job. I'll be at Newtown Middle next Wednesday. And thanks again. Really, thanks. Good stuff.
Mrs. Pollak.
So first of all, thank you so much it was a great presentation. And I agree with pretty much everything I've heard, especially with Dr. Thorward about the benchmarks and the baselines, because you can't really, you see improvement, but versus what? We don't really know exactly what was a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. So that would be very, very helpful to have. So the other thing is, the teachers have so much on their shoulders. It sounds like they have to teach, they have to make up the educational loss that is different for like different students. When do they have time to do all this? I mean, we don't have extra hours, we don't have extra days, so they have to be extremely efficient, or they need a process in place to be able um, to do all this. So some of the initiatives that are proposed are great. Let's get them done quickly. Don't wait until next year. I mean, can we do things now to have this, the children and the teachers and the administrators? Let's do it as soon as possible. And I do believe that elementary school right now is extremely important, the loss, because whatever they've lost, they're going to carry it into the future. So if we need to do anything extra there, other than what you suggested, I mean, we are here, I think we all have the same objectives. We all want to help the children improve and get to the standards that they're supposed to do. So I am just kind of like feeling, let's do it now. Let's not wait for too long. Maybe if it's incremental, things that we can do over time, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tate?
Yeah, thank you all for coming and presenting, and, you know, thank you to every teacher in this district who's worked so hard over the past couple of years. I'm sure it's been, I know it's been, and I've heard it's been a real challenge. And what we've heard tonight, I think, reinforces the fact that our teachers are absolutely dedicated and will go above and beyond to meet the needs of kids. And I think it was you, Mr. Tritzkavich, who said that setting aside scores and that kind of data, what really is important is what teachers are seeing in individual kids on a day-by-day basis. And you know, I trust that our teachers are constantly assessing kids and their individual needs, and it's a huge challenge. There's a couple of things to Ms. Pelly's point. What can we do now? And I saw your suggestions, Dr. Elliott, and two that jumped out at me are the elementary schedule and the middle school schedule. And I've been supportive of those recommended changes, and I think what we heard tonight just reinforces the need to act on those opportunities to make school life better on the elementary level and make school life better on the middle school level. Those are not a huge lift in either case, and I think we ought to really look long and hard at supporting those two changes. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Yeah, Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Talton.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming out. This has been fantastic to sit here and to listen to your feedback, your understanding, your assessment. Really means a lot, and I echo the sentiments of a lot of my colleagues around the table. So I'm not going to repeat many of the things that I agree with. But this would be wonderful if you guys could come back and provide us that recurring element so that we can all come together and gel around what needs to be done. The WIN, the comparative RA and or clinic time as we move through seems to be very important. I heard a lot about entrance and exit tickets, and I imagine and I'm hoping that this is a symbiotic type of meeting where you guys can look at the data that's being provided and understand what the student needs. At the same point, the student's able to tell you what they believe they need and then utilize that time. I think that should be expanded. That's probably what we need to do, because while averages are very helpful, they obscure the low end and the high end, and it enables us to take our eyes off of that. We've got kids that are struggling really hard that the average conceals, as well as kids that are doing really well that are now being held back because we're trying to either bring the bottom up or move the middle up. So I really do recognize the situation that you're in, and I appreciate that you're all here working on it. And that's why I'd like to see you come back, and this is a great start. Let's just sort of see where this continues. So thank you all.
Okay, I think I'm last, I waited for the last, to do last this time instead of talking first. I appreciate everybody coming out. I was listening in before I got here, and I really appreciate you guys are champions for the kids, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I think just a few things, like when it comes to benchmarking and stuff, I would like to see how we looked compared to our peers across the, however we felt in previous years versus how we would fall now, today. And then moving on to what Dr. Elliott was asking for, more time for the kids to learn how to learn. I would like to ask a question about that, a little more detail. But the special ed staff, or was it like learning support staff? Are they kind of the same thing? I wasn't sure if you said special ed or learning
I said
support.
special education, so that could be in a variety of different areas of special ed where we need some support. So it could be learning support, it could be emotional support, it could be in our autistic support, different programs. And
Okay.
so we're evaluating those needs now as an administrative team to determine kind of what exactly we need based
So
on.
the numbers you're working on, okay.
Mhm.
And then math specialist for 4, 5, 6, you don't have one currently. Is that for the district-wide, or would that be each for the district?
So we have math specialists that are at each of our elementary buildings. Their two primary responsibilities are, number one, our math enrichment program, which takes up a good chunk of their time. And then with the remaining time, they've prioritized providing remediation to our primary grades because of the importance of building those foundational mathematics skills. So we have kids in grades 4, 5, and 6 who would benefit from support, remedial support in math, that because of the number of math specialists that we have, we just don't have the personnel to be able to do that. And so that was the purpose of a possibility of adding a math specialist to the staffing needs to help meet the needs of our kiddos.
Would we add a staff, or we just designate a current teacher to be?
Well, I mean, it would be adding the equivalent of a staff member. It might be an internal person that becomes that math specialist, but it would be adding another staff member to our current number, yeah.
All right, and then the English language support as a second language, right? That
Correct.
every school, or?
It depends on, well, we have different numbers of English language learners across our 15 schools. It depends on the need at that school, but right now our ELD specialists, most of them all have 2 buildings, and so they work across those 2 buildings, and having another ELD specialist will allow us to really target some of our buildings where we maybe have a higher number of students who more recently moved in that need some additional support, and we can better kind of prioritize those folks across the buildings to provide that support.
So possibly one more for the district that would
Well,
start around.
I would love a lot more. I would love a lot more math specialists too, but being reasonable, as Mr. Solomon said, what do we need within reason, so.
Okay, and then you already talked about, and then the 2 priorities at the elementary schedule and perhaps the fifth special. I guess the last thing, when you said the kids, I would like to know what technology, since I have you all in the room right now, I'm really big on certain technologies that are free. Some of them are not free, and I'd love to see what free technologies that are out there that are, or that people can use, that we are using. Maybe some teachers are not, because I know with the PLCs, everybody should kind of share it already, what's working and what's not. And I'd like to see even subscriptions like the IXL I always talk about. I find that fascinating, that the Common Core can be, basically tested just by kids jumping in there. Yes, you have
I
a
speak to the IXL, and I only know IXL in math. I don't know anything else about it. But we did look at IXL a couple of years ago, and although it says that it's aligned to the Common Core, it really gets at depth of knowledge is labeled at 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it really gets more at level 1 of a standard, where many standards are meant to be level 2 and 3. It doesn't really go in depth enough to get the true meaning of the standard.
Right.
It's more skills based, which skills are certainly important, I'm not denying that. But if we're looking for a program that's going to increase our students' mastery of math content, IXL probably isn't the best program.
Sure.
There's far better programs out there that can do that, get to the true rigor of the standard.
Okay, but it might actually, it's a self-assessment tool that people can run through it and they can see where they're actually struggling. If they're missing the questions, then you can actually identify, but the teacher has access to what's going on.
Piloted it a couple times to look at it.
And so I think it's offered for some, but for social studies or science, there's all different modules. And I understand it might not be ideal for like the only tool, but I think for somebody that maybe you give them an incentive, a student incentive to earn the credits or the points, the stars or whatever, I find when my own student does that I identify weak spots by them going through that. And I can't talk to the teacher or I can't see what you guys are doing, but I can sure as heck as a parent put them in front of this and they can go through the different skill sets. And if they're getting it wrong, if they don't know their history or they don't know their science, I know that immediately just from them being encouraged to learn. So besides IXL, I'd like to know what other technologies that we can offer the parents, or the students, because obviously they're in school for 6.5 hours a day, but a lot of learning takes place outside that time.
I would recommend Khan Academy. Khan Academy does an amazing job of getting at this, KHA, it does an amazing job of getting at the rigor of the standard, and it actually gives videos when students don't understand, and it gives assessments, so it kind of gives you the same kind of data. It just is more robust and more at the intent of the standard.
Well, that's a gem I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I think I like it. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you. Mr. Tate.
Excuse me, Khan's free, isn't it?
It is free.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms.
I just had
Marcel?
just one final comment. Just thinking about what Ed Talman said, I think that we are dealing with a lot of new challenges, but I also, just based on some of the data that we were looking at in terms of PSSA scores and other scores, I also think it might be different, like at different schools. Like I just feel like they're like different. There are a couple. It's not like just this one kind of cookie cutter approach. And so I also would say that from my perspective, if you have creative solutions or maybe like a teacher that is doing something that works somewhere that is worth trying in other areas. I just can only speak for myself, but I would love to be able to take a look at those things that we might be able to help fund in our budget in terms of just creative solutions. Obviously, we don't have like a limitless fund that we can do this, but I feel like if it's a software program, if it's, I don't know what it is, but I do know a number of teachers that have, like my daughter, if she needs extra help for math, can stay in during, or not stay in, but like eat lunch with her teacher, and if they have a math test coming up, and they can get extra help. There are people doing all of these special things, which thank you so much to the teachers for doing them, but I also know that, well, I've been told that, year after year, people ask for things and they're told no, and that's because we only have so much money to work with, and that's just reality. But if I'd be interested in looking at, are there some solutions out there? I don't know what they are, but just if there are some little things that we can do that would make people's lives easier, if we can earmark them as, kind of for this learning loss, learning gaps area. I don't know what the solution is, but I just wanted to say, like, just based on Mr. Hidalgo's comments and others, if there are things out there, I think at least I'm interested in seeing what that is. And I know that you put forward some suggestions, Dr. Elliott, which is wonderful. But I also just think if there are some little things that might work at a specific school, or I don't know what the solution is, but I just really appreciate everyone thinking about this and thinking about the best path forward for Council Rock. So just wanted to mention that.
And I can say with respect to the assessment scores and comparing them across buildings, even before the pandemic, our PSSA scores across our 10 elementary schools and our 2 middle schools, they were never the same scores. There was always a range of proficiency levels across the schools. So the fact that we still have that And it, it's all pretty relative, like it's the same, everybody decreased, but the range of where they kind of typically have fallen has been pretty consistent with respect to each other. So that piece is not something that's new since the pandemic, that now our elementary schools and our middle schools are in such vastly different places across the comparison of the 10 schools. But I think to your point, we are always, our curriculum coordinators are always getting feedback from teachers, and when they come to the board, usually in the spring with requests for new textbooks or new materials and things, it is often based on getting feedback from teachers. We need this. This would be beneficial to us, and we continue to look at our curriculum and our programs, and they're doing that now, and they're doing that from the lens of what do we need to help kids, and so that's something that we are getting that feedback. Buildings do learn from each other. Buildings will try a different software resource, and then we'll hear from folks like, oh, we think this would be really great to try. And some of the digital resources that we currently use, we came across them because they were like Nearpod is a perfect example. That was being used a lot in North, and we got feedback from North and some others that were using it, like, this is a really good resource. All right, we invested in it for the whole district. So we do gather that feedback and think about what are some of the resources that would be beneficial. And our building principals also have funds that they can use within their building if there are things they need based on their populations as well.
Can I segue off of that? You're right. I mean, I can tell you, I can tell you for years which was going to be the lowest score in elementary. But here's the counter to that. One of the math grades at the middle schools, they're so disparate as to be blinding. If we swap the staff, would it change? I literally pick up the Holland Middle School staff for math, and put them in Newtown, and put the Newtown in Holland Middle School. Would those grades change? Because what's going on? I see it, but I don't see any attempt at what's going on. And isn't that what we should be looking at? If we see it historically year after year after year, why? Should be the question. Why?
Right, and I know Julie can speak to this as well, but the middle school math in particular is something that we have been looking at even prior to the pandemic, and really looking at is our instruction aligned to the curriculum, and that's one of the reasons why in May when we present the board with new resources for consideration, one of them is going to be a new middle school math curriculum, because we recognize that we need something different there, and unfortunately, the pandemic put a delay in our ability to be able to review and pilot and look at resources. So it's something that we are aware of. We're continuing to work to address that. It's not solved yet, and I agree with you, Mike. That data is low. I think particularly one of the other pieces when you think about 8th grade in particular, which is where some of our lower math scores are, 50% at least of our 8th graders are taking Algebra 1. So they take the Algebra 1 Keystone, and they have to take the 8th grade PSSA as well. So they're taking 2 standardized tests. And our kids that take the Keystone in Algebra 1 in 8th grade, 99% of those kids are proficient. So they're focusing on the algebra standards. So another piece that might be contributing to the lower score on the 8th grade PSSA is because those kids aren't focusing on those standards. They're focusing on the algebra standards. So there's a couple different factors that are probably playing into why those scores are where they are that we continue to want to look at and understand.
And I'm getting at, in the 2 schools, they're focused on
you're right.
radically different. Mm-hmm. And that falls, this is the group right here that falls. So.
I don't see anyone else. Before we move on.
I was just going to follow,
okay.
You said that you're changing the program at the middle school level next year. So what happens if the scores are still the same? Like consistently, to Mr. Thorwald's point, you have one middle school performing at a level that is 15% lower than the other middle school. Okay, you've changed the program, but the results are still the same. We're still not getting that, to his point, What if you switch the staff, like to isolate, if you switch the staff and you get the same results, okay, well then, it's not, but, not that you can switch staffs, but the fact that it's been happening for years doesn't make it necessarily a good thing.
Right, and I think the other piece to this puzzle, and Julie, you can speak to this. In 2015, we had a new PSSA, or 14. A new PSSA was revised in 2014. It was a brand new test. And across the state, not unique to Council Rock, what we saw, particularly in 8th grade, was a significant drop in the number of students who were proficient on the 8th grade PSSA math test across the state. So that speaks to the question of, is it the kid or is it the test that we're looking at?
I have the data for that.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, 32% of students that took the assessment across the state of Pennsylvania were proficient or advanced. And this past year, 22.1% of the students across the state of Pennsylvania that took the assessment were proficient or advanced. We've talked to the state. I belong to a math consortium, and we have had the gentleman from the state out to talk, and they stand by their test. But part of the problem is we have students that are studying for and passing the Keystone and doing very well on the Keystone, and then being basic or below basic on the 8th grade PSSA. You're correct, because the standards are different. The 8th grade standards that they're being tested on, they're being instructed on in 7th grade, and in 8th grade in Honors Algebra 1, they're working on the Algebra 1 Keystone standards that they have to focus on too, because they're being tested on that, which is still somewhat of a graduation requirement.
But I think you're blurring two items. The standards seem to be different in the two middle schools too. I'm sorry, they are. That's an entirely different. No matter how you measure it, the standards are different.
It's an instructional issue.
Yeah.
And that's part of what the new program is meant to address. And we have a lot of staff development plans for next year for that. So we are addressing it.
Okay, and before we move on, I just wanted to go back to some recommendations, Dr. Elliott, that you had made, and say that I am very eager to see a schedule change at the middle school to provide the RA period and allow more time. We keep saying we need time. I think an adjustment to middle school schedule would help with that. I'm very supportive of that, as well as a change to the elementary schedule. I'm very supportive of seeing a 5th special in there, providing time and additional instructional time for our students. So I just wanted to go back to those couple of things. So if we are okay on this topic, we're ready to move on.
We are ready to move on.
I'm sorry? Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really
Yes, they
appreciate
need
your
to go.
time.
So thank you so much.
Look at enrollment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You can't tell me.
So we do have our other presenters are on the phone.
Great.
So do we want to start right away or, okay.
Yes, let's keep it moving.
So, Ms. McKee, we have our two of our demographers with us tonight. We have Mr. Matt Cropper and Dr. Jerome McKibben, who are on the phone. So they're going to walk us through the demographic study report, and they will be directing Mr. Fredrickson to advance slides as they listen. And please be patient, as I know we are just, they're a few seconds behind in what they see on the screen from what we see. So Mr. Cropper and Dr. McKibben, are you there?
I am here.
The floor is yours.
Matthew? Matthew, are you there? Yes, I am here as well. I'm glad to hear that. So, thank you all. In the interest of brevity, since we're running quite a bit behind, I'd like to go right to slide 3, the assumptions. Skip the first two on the overview. And if you're there. And I don't want to go through all the assumptions, but there's like 3 very key ones that we need to examine. The first one is B, 30-year the 30-year fixed mortgage rates. Your housing market's the backbone of your migration. I mean, very simple rule. You have to have a place to move into the district. We assume that the 30-year fixed mortgage will stay below 4.5% over the life of the forecast. Why it's so important? Well, we're already seeing a rise in interest rates now. Pretty much a conclusion that Jerome Powell's going to raise rates by half a point both in May and June. We'll be testing 4.5 by the end of the year. That could have a slowing of the housing market. If it continues and it goes up towards 5%, it'll be significant. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I'll probably be too high if the 30-year fixed rate is at 5% this time next year. So again, we track this very closely, and also what your existing home sales are like on Zillow and Realtor.com. But that's probably the most important of the assumptions, I would have to say, at this juncture. What does the interest rates do? And the housing market is really strange right now. So this has got a lot of variability in it. If you go to the next slide, G, the unemployment rate stays below 7.5%, both in the county and the greater Philadelphia metropolitan area over the next 10 years. This also says we don't go into a recession either, and you'll see a return to the unemployment rates we saw during the height of COVID. And then if you go to the third assumption slide, it's Q and R. Again, ties into the housing market. We assume the district will have at least 50 single-family new homes constructed per year over the next 10 years. But more importantly, the district will have an average of 700 existing home sales per year over the next 10 years. And I'll get into this more and more as we go through the forecast. This is, again, a key number. How fast and how quickly, what's the magnitude of the rate of your housing turnover? And that ties into the next slide, which is your first population pyramid. And this is from 2010. We use kind of a backdrop. And this was in 2010, the age distribution of the district. And you'll notice that the biggest bar is 50 to 54-year-olds, okay? And again, for those who didn't listen to the last presentation, real quickly how to read this, your 0 to 4 is your preschoolers, 5 to 9 is your elementary, 10 to 14 is middle school, 15, 19 is high school, 20 to 34, so referred to as family formation ages. 80% of all births occur to women in the ages 20 to 34 years old. Birth rates, despite what you've heard in the popular press, haven't changed that much over the last 40 years. They've stayed in a nice tight 15% band between 1.7 and 2.0 births per woman in her lifetime. 35 to 54 are the ages where most people have kids in school. There are exceptions to that, but that's if you have public meetings and the parents show up, the vast majority of them in those age groups. 55 to 69 are called the empty nest households. These are people who tend to stay in their homes. Only about 5% will downsize if their kids immediately leave high school. And they're still living there, but the household size has gone from 4 or 5 down to 2. And then the 70 and over is referred to as housing turnover ages. It's not retirement that triggers most downsizing. It's either the death of one of the spouses or both lose the ability to drive. Then they have a hard time maintaining the household that's in a downsize. They leave, and a new family, usually with children, will move in. So how does your population is distributed across the life course? Very, very key variable of what your future population enrollment is going to be. The next slide is for 2020. Okay, and what happened is everybody got 10 years older, okay? But you'll see your 2 largest bars are now in their late 50s, early 60s, and you're going to have an increasing number of householders over the age of 70, in fact, over the age of 75 and 80 over the next 10 years. those homes will downsize. So the biggest change in your housing market going forward in the next 10 years is the rate and magnitude of these elderly householders that probably haven't had school-age kids in them for 20, 25 years, turning over and allowing new young households with children to move in. And that's very, very key to your demographics, because you'll notice that consistently you have a 0 to 4 bar that is smaller than your 5 to 9, which means without migration, just left to your own demographic devices, your elementary enrollment will decline. You need in migration to have households bring kids in, fill in that deficit, and when that's happened, then you have real growth, all right? So now this distribution is different amongst all of your elementary attendance areas. Older in the north, younger in the south. That's why we have one of these pyramids for each one of your attendance areas. But this is going to be the dominant factor as you're aging your population. We go to the next slide. This shows some of the household characteristics. And the key numbers here, twofold. One, the district, even in 2010, only had 36.7% of the households under 18 population. That's now down closer to about 33% in the 2020 census. We'll get the final numbers on that in about 2 months. And your household size has also dropped from 275 down to about 2.62. Now, but the other factor for this table is to show how much difference you have between your elementary attendance areas. Wide variation across the variables. Under 18 population, you have a high of 64 or 46% in Holland to a low of 30% in Rolling Hills. You know, household size, see the same factor. Mary Welch and Holland both above 3, and you've got, again, Rolling Hills down about 2.38. So it's the demographic characteristics of the area has a very strong correlation to how that's going to change over time. If you go to the next slide, you see more variation going down. Household owners, you know, about 90% for the district, but again, a wide range from 94 down to 86 and 82% in some areas. Again, a key variable because homeowners tend to be older, have finished their family formation, and tend to move every 14 years. Whereas renters are still trying to have kids. You don't come out of college and buy a house or an apartment. They're still having their kids, and they move an average every 2 years. Also going up here is percent of householders over the age of 65. It was 22% in 2010. It's over 25% right now. So again, as reflecting this aging of your population, you have more and more householders over the age of 85 that will potentially turn over their homes in the next 10 years. For each one of the attendance areas, we have a population forecast. This is one for the district's total. You'll notice your median age is going up dramatically. That starts to flatten out this decade as you have those older households move out and new younger households move in. The numbers at the bottom, births, deaths, and actual increase, or the amount of change in these variables over the 10-year period. You'll notice a slight decline in births, not because of a decline in fertility rate, but fewer women in prime childbearing age. You'll notice that deaths go up rather precipitously, not due to any factor like COVID or anything like that, but again, due to an aging population. Your net migration goes up a little bit because you're going to be swapping out 1 and 2 person elderly households, bringing in 3 and 4 person younger households. So you're going to have a positive in migration flow as this turnover continues. But because you lose so much of your natural increase, your total population growth slows down. These population forecasts are used to drive the enrollment forecast, and again, this is the district level, okay? So the main hallmark here is you'll notice that after the year 2025, you'll start to see a rather consistent, precipitous 1.5% increase in your elementary enrollment. And this is a result of more of those older empty nest households turning over and the new homeowners bringing children with them going into the district. Because of the housing prices where they're located, most of these children will be probably in elementary ages, might be some preschoolers in there as well, okay? Might even be some early middle school. At the same time, you have some relatively large cohorts graduating out of 12th grade, so you'll see a slight decline in your high school enrollment. So you're going to see middle school kind of in the trough of these two waves, going down initially, then going up as that new migration wave comes. So all in all, the district's enrollment increases only by about 100 students over the next 10 years. But that distribution of the students within your grade level is going to be dramatically different. Most of that increase is going to be in the elementary, less of it in the middle, and almost none of it in the high school areas. I did that in 12 minutes. That's a record for me.
Excellent. So we're ready for questions, comments?
Got one.
Dr. Thorwart.
Just real quick, you've done this study for us before. Did you look back and I'm looking for error bars. I'm not trying to poke holes in your methods, but just I'm trying to get a feel for how accurate were you before. Did you look?
I was too high.
You were too high?
I was about 500 students. I was 500 students too high, just like I was in just about every other school district in the country. COVID did that.
Okay, and that's why we're having a conversation. That's why it's.
Yeah, the average school district lost between 3 and 9% of their enrollment in 2020, all across the board, across the country. Rich, poor, east, west, north, south, you name it, they all went down. The bigger thing, much more variation, is the bounce back in the next year. How many in return? And by the way, most of that loss was in the K through 5 grades across the country. The bounce back's been all over the rate. I've seen everything from 95% come back to back-to-back years of decline, you know, and a lot of that depended on what the local policies were. Vaccination requirements, mask requirements, availability of other non-public options. It really varied everywhere across the country. So, so most districts will probably see some bounce back rates. And again, it varies from state to state dramatically. It depends on what the state policies are, and what the local policies are in conjunction with that. But, oh yeah, like, you know, very, very few districts came in anywhere close to it. We're doing really good till COVID. Then the bottom dropped out. So.
And that's fair. I mean, I could have compared the numbers, but I wanted to hear the explanation, and you gave it to me.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Well, I told this all districts, you know, I'm at fault here. I did not see a pandemic coming.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
You got me on that one, folks. Yeah. I can't argue that one. So.
No, that's cool. I appreciate it.
I'll also tell you that this whole forecasting thing doesn't work on lottery numbers either. So.
We appreciate that. Mr. Hickey and then Mr. Tate, go ahead.
Although I did look at the numbers and compared your old study to this, and I did it pre-pandemic, and you were still high.
Yep.
Maybe by not a magnitude of 500, but maybe half of that or 200.
Well, one of it was you pulled the special education numbers out of them, and we're assuming that you put them back into their individual grades. So there was, I got the 18 study pulled up on my computer here. There's a 156 drop there, you know. So if the SE students were not pulled back in, we're comparing apples to fire hydrants here. So that's the 156 drop there. Take that out, we're still within about a percentage, you know. So part of that might be a definitional error of enrollment. You'll notice in this slide up here in total enrollment, we still have that SE number in there in the 17-18, which was our base number in the last study. And then there's that precipitous 156 decline, I tend to look at that more as a base number because of consistency in the data. We don't know for sure that those special ed were put back in their home grades or not. I suspect not.
I do think that they were included back rolled into the actual numbers, but we do identify a plus or minus 2% confidence band typically through the life of our forecast. And we had been tracking within, really close to that, to within or below 2% of the forecast versus actual. And so that, I believe that the forecasts prior to the pandemic were tracking fairly well, although not perfect or not right on. But once the 2020 came on board, that's really where we started seeing more deviation from forecast because the things we had assumed were starting to become violated.
Well, another thing on that too is a lot of the assumptions we had for home building, developers promising us they were absolutely going to build all these housing units in 18 and 19 did not come to pass. You did not see the building that had been, I believe, stated was going to come along. So, and also your existing home sales were already starting to drop off in 18 and 19 before pandemic. Again, those are two major assumptions, and going forward, 700 is the key number there. You're going to need to have about 700 households turn over, or, as I said earlier, I'm going to be too high. If they don't sell those homes and move out and let new young households move in, you're not going to have this level of enrollment. And right now, something goes in the market, sells in 38 minutes, but then your realtor will say, hey, we're in the country. The supply of existing homes in the market right now is an all-time post-World War II low. And, why would they able to move during a pandemic anyway? So, but they're going to get older, and they're going to not be able to take care of these homes, and some are going to lose their spouses and all, but they're going to have to move. So, particularly if you start seeing large numbers of your population, particularly in the north over the age of 75, they're going to have to downsize.
Don't know why he feels he's talking to me.
This is a phone call. I can't see anybody.
Well, I'm looking at your report, and I think it's very readable and understandable, and it also sort of tracks with what I think we see around our district. Everybody likes to think they're unique, but we saw with tax revenues that there was an unexpected higher rate of home sales in our school district over the past 2 years. And there's also a good amount of development that's really moving forward that was sort of on hold during the pandemic. For example, a 45 home subdivision that's been approved in Newtown Township. Would that have been captured in here?
I am so glad you mentioned that, okay?
Good.
45 housing units. Your district has 26,000 housing units in it. 45 is a rounding error, okay?
Yeah.
In that same area they want to build this, there needs to be at least 250 existing home sales per year. And I'm going back to this main point again. You put a house in the market in Council Rock today, it will be sold by the end of the week, and you'll get $40,000, $50,000 above asking price. I guarantee it. Okay. The problem is no one's putting them on the market. And so if they do bring these 45 in, is that enough to make up for your shortfall in existing home sales? No, it's not. And not just in Council Rock, not just in Metro Philadelphia, all over the country right now seeing this. So And that's why the developers are pushing through everything they've got on the books right now. They're trying to make up that shortfall. But new home construction is only 10 to 15% of the housing market. Even if they could get supplies right now, and most developers I'm talking to can't find windows, can't get roofing material, they can't find concrete in some areas of the country. You know, bringing on 45 in a year right now, that's a moral major victory if you can pull that off. You know, so it's, you can't look at the one number with it. They're coming in 45 households. What is it in the total picture? And against 26,000 total housing holds, that's small potatoes.
Oh, yeah. 45 units is just an example of what's going on, but I think what you're saying is that the Council Rock real estate market really is not different than what you're seeing elsewhere?
No. Yeah. And that 45, I hope it comes in because I'm planning on at least 50 per year. You know, they better come in or again, I'm going to be too high. But no, what's going on in Council Rock is going on all over the country right now. But it's going to change because the one thing I do know for sure that everybody who's in the district right now and still in the district 10 years from now will be 10 years older. Okay, I guarantee you that. And if you're in your mid-60s and a homeowner right now, you're going to be in your mid-70s 10 years from now, and that number of homes going on the market is going to go up. Not just there, but all over the country. This is the dominant demographic trend of the next 10 years is the aging of the baby boom into their 70s. The front end is 76 right now, and the peak is 65. You know, and you guys have a baby boom population like everybody else. And they're all, most of them are homeowners.
And so, I'm sorry, one last question. So, and your assumption is that there are how many new housing units per year over the next 10 years? 50.
50 per year.
Oh, there it is. I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Single family homes per year. Good. Thank you.
Ms. Marcel?
I had a quick question. So, you know, the impetus for having this study done was because we have overcrowding at 2 elementary schools, Wrightstown and in Holland. And so based on what you just presented to the board, is it that in like the near future that the population of those schools will be declining enough that overcrowding will not be a problem? And then eventually it will come back and we'll have to deal with it at that point? Or is there something else that the public should come away with in relation to those 2 schools and the problem that we have at hand?
I'm going to let you answer that one, Matthew.
Well, looking at the forecast for Holland and Wrightstown, you could see that that just like Dr. McKibben was saying was the trend in the next 5 years, it's more stable. And Holland is more stable than Wrightsville. I mean, it's going to be right around the same number until you get to that 5-year point. And then it's anticipated to go up about 50 students. And Wrightstown is, you know, pretty much in the same boat. It's going to be stable, and then it's forecasted to go up by about 40 students. And so I don't think, according to the way the forecasts are reading, that you're going to see any capacity relief through changes or declines in enrollment, but it's not anticipated or forecasted to get much worse in the next 5 years. But then after that next 5 is where we start seeing a rise in enrollment.
Other questions?
Just a couple comments.
Mr. Salmon?
Thanks, guys, for coming back to work with us. Appreciate the work that was done. I actually served on the redistricting committee at the time, so I did spend many nights with Matt in the other room across the hall. So it's even better to have you folks on a 3-year contract where we can monitor what's going on in Council Rock today, tomorrow, and in the future. A couple questions. One, how many active school districts are you doing around the country?
Right now about 50 or 60.
Okay, so
we are probably the busiest we have been in ever, because what we've seen is that there was a lag in requests for demographic studies through the pandemic because districts were just basically trying to figure out how to adjust and adapt to, all of that impactful change. And so they basically were doing work that was wanted to be done in 2020, 2021. And so I'd say we have at least 25 active demographic studies going right now for districts all over the country of all sizes.
Yeah, and I think that's important because we'll be able to see not just a local trend, but a national trend of what you're saying, and that you can bring that to the table for us. But Matt, as you will remember in Council Rec, logistically speaking, many of our schools are on top of each other. Many of our kids walk to some schools that could have been in a target zone to be redistricted. We do have district level special ed classrooms embedded in some of these schools that, internally we may need to look at cleaning up and better utilizing. And we need a real fresh set of utilization numbers in these schools to determine what is, the best course of action to clean it up. But the elephant in the room is we have 2 middle schools that are the same size. So that is the problem that we had in redistricting. It is the problem everybody will have moving forward. But having you folks on board, makes me feel better, and I appreciate the work. So this board's got a lot of work to do, and working with the administrative team to figure out what, if necessary, needs to be done. Dr. Ellie, you can agree with this. There's no work been done on this. There's some sentiment in our community that there's decisions that have already been made. That's not true. This board has just got this information a week ago. This is the first time we're talking about it in public. Some of the older board members that have been here, and I would consider myself only older because I served on the redistricting committee, this is new and old to some of us. So there's a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of decision making with capital planning to the next course of action at Richford Elementary School, and then obviously trying to alleviate some of the pressure points around the district. So I think it's important for the public to hear that, and that's all I have at this time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
One of the things the district can do, and we do this when we do our evaluations, is about every month or so, get on Zillow or Realtor.com or one of the real estate websites. They'll show you home sales by address. Everything about your home is public domain data. It's going to start picking up here in April because most people with kids move between April and August. Makes sense, okay? So you see this rise, and you should see a precipitous rise in your home sales in April go through August, and compare that. Now you can look at what the home sales were for the last 3 years too on there, and see how you're doing on that. And that's the key number I look at when I do the evaluation. Okay, how close to that 700 existing home sales that I put in your assumptions are they going to get there? Now, if you're running about 750, 800, I might be a little low, but if you're running about 600, 550, it's going to be too high. And you should do that over time and see who's going to go on the market. There's a lot of variables out there that you have to take a look at, but that's the most important one. And if they all of a sudden decide, people out there, well, I'm sitting on a ton of equity, the prices are high right now, I'm going to get out while the getting good if I can find someplace else to move to, they may decide to sell and leave. I wouldn't blame them. Or they may decide to sit tight and see how things work out next year. But I'd keep an eye on that because that is your key variable.
Thank you. Ms. Polly has a question, then Mr. Tate.
Yeah. I have a question. So the private school and homeschool attendance went high over the pandemic because of various reasons. And in your assumptions, you say that the private and homeschool attendance will remain the same, but isn't it most likely that a lot of these students will come back to the district?
That's a good question because You're right, again, all over the country, homeschool, charter, private school rates all went up, okay? And now they're starting to come back down for a host of reasons. Again, it depends a lot on state and local policies and all that. And they will come back down. They will not, I don't think personally, ever go back down to pre-pandemic levels, particularly homeschool. Now, where that was only about 1.5% beforehand, it might go back down to 2%, which is still low. It'll never go back down to where it was before. Private school, maybe a little closer to the previous ones because, again, you have to have the resources to pay for private school. Charter is kind of the wild card in there. It depends on availability. But again, they'll go back down, but never quite pre-pandemic levels. So we're kind of assuming that it does go down to, close to, but not quite the pre-pandemic level and stay constant. Now, if they've opened a new charter school in the area, that would have to be added to the forecast result. If a private school closes, you have to subtract it from that as well. And again, from across the country, we're seeing as many private and charter schools getting closed as we are opening. So it's
and to add to that too, when the pandemic occurred, a lot of parents chose a homeschool option or a private school option as opposed to public school for whatever reason they chose. Those children were, they put them into that new setting. And so now that those children are in that new school setting for 2 years or 1 or 2 years, it's very unlikely that those kids are going to get moved back into public school. There's like Dr. McKibben said, we anticipate that rate is still going to be there, but moving forward, once things balance out, settle down with the climate as it relates to the pandemic, those rates of incoming families coming in are going to go back to more of a norm. But maybe not at the same levels, but we do expect some more balancing of that public to private participation rate than what you saw the last couple of years.
And that's a good point. You have to remember that most of, we call them COVID DNETs that left is K through 4, okay? So they're already moving through the system, or moving through the life course and all that. Now they'll be heading, many of them, into middle school ages, things like that. But, there's other factors in there like, family resources. You have to provide your own transportation for that, things like that. Private school, there's a cost. They've got their own problems right now, too. But as we move forward, like Matt said, they're going to go back down towards pre-COVID levels. The exception to that's going to be homeschool. I do believe that homeschool will stay at a slightly higher rate. Now, again, that was a very small proportion of the total population, total enrollment. But I don't think it'll ever go back down below because a lot of the stigma of homeschool is now gone. Same with virtual. No one had virtual capabilities for the pandemic. Now they've all got them. So I think those two areas you're going to see some true increase, a bit small, but still true increase going forward. But the rate should go back down for all 4 of those factors to relatively close to pre-pandemic levels.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tate.
Yeah, I'm going to touch one more time on the question of development, just to sort of make sure that I understand it correctly. The assumption going forward is going to be, as you work with us over the next couple of years, 3 years overall, 50 new single-family homes per year. It's not within the scope of what you do to be analyzing permits and development projects that are in the works in specific parts of the district, right?
I would say we do identify and listen to what is being planned, but we also are cautious to take everything that's that's in the plan and assume that it's going to come to fruition, because we've seen over the years of doing this that a lot of building plans and comprehensive plans for housing sometimes, whatever conditions, whatever the reason, sometimes they lag on, and they'll be in platted or subdivided, but nothing's built for a period of time, period of a couple of years, sometimes 8 to 10 years, and so we feel it's better to anticipate and plan with what's platted and approved, things that are guaranteed, that we're certain, and be more cautious with things that are in a long-range comprehensive plan, because otherwise we would end up being way too high if we incorporated all of those into our forecast.
Yeah, that makes good sense, and it's true here that sometimes the delay is actually the municipalities and trying to get a project approved. But overall, what you look at is an aggregate district-wide. You're not looking at what's going on in the real estate market in specific parts of the district, correct?
Oh, no, yeah, we look at that. Again, that's for the existing home sales. That's why I like using Zillow and Realtor, is I get home sales down to the address level. What's being planned and plan approved, they have to report it to the city. Here's where I want to build it at. But there's another way to look at this, okay? The two numbers here in question are 700 and 50, okay? Put them together, 750 new households per year, okay? In the whole scheme of things, it doesn't matter if it's new or existing, as long as it's 750. If they build 100 and they only sell 650, I still got my 750, okay? Now, you have to look at the where's it being built? Are we seeing fewer home sales up north, more building in the south? Well, then that would be a factor for the individual attendance area. But yeah, we look at again, that's why we look at the age structure by attendance areas. Okay, here's where we're going to think we're going to see more of the turnover because of an older housing householder in that area. Like I said, the north is far older than the south.
Right.
So the key number to look at here is 750. Have 750 new households move in per year. Okay. And then try to figure out where they're going. Now, the new home construction's easy. I mean, they said there's a plot here on Elm Street. We're gonna put 45 houses in there. That's a piece of cake. Anybody can do that. Okay, it's that 750 scattered all over the district. That's the tough part.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Mr. Solomon?
No, I'm good, thank you.
No? Okay, Mrs. Marcel.
I have a question more for Dr. Elliott, essentially what you think of. Some parents have just obviously been asking about this, and if the board is going to take an action as it relates to some of the overcrowding. Are there any comments you have in terms of enrollment, looking at the numbers as we get closer to June 1st? I don't know if we can comment on that, just so that the public has a sense of like, hey, what's going to be happening over the next few months, so that if they are interested, how can they kind of follow along in this, essentially, since we're not taking any action tonight, this is just a discussion.
Do you want to speak to the process at the elementary level?
So we have an enrollment date of June 1st. So currently, as we sit here, we have students who have enrolled for the upcoming school year, some that we have fully enrolled and some that are still in the queue, that parents may not have completed all the process of enrolling. But what we do know is the numbers that we have of our students currently, and we roll those numbers forward. And based on the board's recommended class size, that will predicate how many sections we have in each particular grade level. So you can find on our website, each month we update our enrollment form. So parents can go to our website and search for enrollment. It'll show by school, elementary, middle, high school, how many total students we have enrolled. For us, probably the two biggest wild cards are the number of kindergarten students who will enroll, because we never know that. We have some trends that we know, and then The second is how many students will we have move into the district that aren't already in our numbers? And I believe, I would have to go back to be certain, 100% certain of this number, but I think at Council Rock North this current year, we had 40 new students enroll, which is high for us at the high school level. So parents, the best thing they can look at is our monthly enrollment. March numbers are posted right now. And if they want to look at Wrightstown, they will be able to see the number of sections we currently have. But to move forward, predicting and forecasting next year, they could move those numbers forward by grade level. But again, the one that we don't know, really well is the kindergarten enrollment for the upcoming year.
And I guess because Wrightstown only has one classroom, which is an art room right now, but they have one classroom left at this point. Is there a certain point in June or before then that, if there was a problem or a concern, that you guys would come to us, or I'm just trying to think of what's that critical point in that time period?
Yeah, I think that, we have to talk about this continually. We know last year we spoke about the numbers. We do know that we follow the board recommended guidelines, and across some of our schools now, when we maximize that class size, students then, if they do not enroll by June 1st, they then go to one of our sister schools that has the capacity for the student or the students at that grade level. So we watch it monthly, we track that enrollment monthly, and then we share that information as we get it.
I think too, as we get closer to June 1st, when we feel a little bit more confident in our numbers, it's too early right now to try to make some decisions about things. We can guess based on the current numbers that we have, but we have until June 1st, so we have 2 months yet of folks to be enrolling, and to see where that falls. But we are going to have to consider, to your point, Kristen, we have an art room, like we used at Wrightstown, took a room that was designated for music instruction and made that into a classroom because we needed another classroom. We've taken some spaces that were intended to be small group instruction rooms with a divider in them, and have made those into classrooms. And in all of our buildings, we have those kind of flex spaces where there are times where the room might one year be used for this purpose, but then the next year, because of changes in numbers of sections that are needed, a room gets repurposed for a different reason. And so that's something that we're always looking at across all 10 of our buildings. Dr. Sanko and I have started looking at, to Mr. Solomon, your point about thinking about utilization in spaces, we've started looking at that. What's challenging about it is it's not easy to do an apples to apples comparison of how one building uses the space versus another, because as any building principal would do, they take advantage of every space they have in the building to make use of it to the best that they can for kids. And so when they have to make adjustments to that based on sections, they make those adjustments. So for example, in one building where a math specialist might have a small group instruction room because they typically only work with small groups of kids at a time, in another building, because they just happen to have a regular sized classroom that's available, that math specialist is in a regular sized classroom in that building. So it's difficult to make a true apples to apples comparison. So we're going to have to look at that and look at the registration numbers as they continue to evolve, look at our space utilization, and we may need to be coming back to the board with some questions about some hard decisions, things that we need to do in the immediate future to solve challenges. So something like adding classrooms onto a building is not going to solve the challenge next year. That's multiple years down the road. But things that we could consider could be something like looking at the possibility of relaxing class size guidelines in a couple grades. To be able to say as an example, first grade, our class size guideline is 25. So if before June 1st, we have 52 first graders registered in a building, that's 3 sections of first grade. Well, if we're looking at space challenges, we could consider, I'm not saying that we're going to do this, but we could consider relaxing class size guidelines for that particular building, for that grade, and then providing maybe an instructional assistant to support the teacher where they have more kids than usual. The challenge that we'll have to watch is the size of the bodies in the classroom. So as students get older, and our class size guideline, so 5th and 6th grade, our class size guideline is 30. You really don't want to put more than 30 kids in a 5th or 6th grade classroom. That's high. So we have to you have to think about that, and how do we repurpose spaces, and I know Mr. Solomon, you suggested, do we look at our district programs, and that's another factor that we can look at. And one of the things that we want to keep in mind with our district special education programs, like our artistic support program as an example, we really focus on keeping the kids within a feeder pattern so that they stay in a south feeding school. And if they're in the autistic program, you know, right now it's at Holland Elementary School, and they stay in that feeder pattern. So we're not moving kids across feeder patterns as they progress through the different levels. So that's something we can look at, but again, we want to try to think about some of the things we've tried to keep in place that make the participation and students' growth in those particular programs successful, because we keep them kind of together in a particular feeder pattern.
And Sue, to your point, we relax class size guidelines all the time. This would not be the first time it's been done at Council Rock, just so everyone's aware. That's happened in the past. It happens quite often. So.
I was just going to add one more thing. Just thank you for that response. And then I know a number of board members, I think it was at the end of October, toured Wrightstown with me, which was, I thought it was very helpful. I also think that some of our new board members, it would be helpful for them to see Wrightstown while the students are there. Also, Holland Elementary, obviously, there are a number of schools you can visit, but I do think it's helpful to see, so like at Wrightstown, I don't remember if it's 5th or 6th grade or both grades, but they do have some classes that are very full with 29, 30 kids, and the desks, you know, are going all the way across the room, and I just think it's helpful to see it visually. You know, Title I areas and a conference room and a large closet, like it's helpful to see it visually. So I would just say for the newer board members, I really would encourage you before we have to have this conversation, potentially, hopefully not. It just might be helpful for you guys to see that yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, another option as well that can be a temporary option to consider that's more immediate is a spot redistricting. So you look at your, you know, and I know in my conversations with Mr. Cropper, you know, there are districts that he knows and has worked with where they do spot redistricting every year based on how utilization changes. And we even have some districts within our county where, you know, a spot redistricting happens much more frequently. So again, it's something that can be considered. Whether there's an appetite for that, and again, we need to see the numbers to get a sense of where we are with that before we really make a decision about what's the best thing to do.
Mary, a couple comments, if you don't mind. Is there a way that we can push that June 1st information out? I think we already pushed it out as far as kindergarten. Maybe get it up on our website.
We can send it out on our Friday.
But even get it on the website, because my fear, and Mike and I talked about this.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's already there, but
I think it is
sure
too, but I just wanted to double check for people listening. And if we didn't, let's consider it. You know, we don't know where this economy is going. We don't know where the world's going. You know, some parents are a paycheck away from private school becoming public school. So that's an issue that always weighs on me. The other thing is, and we did a great job last year with Dr. Frazier, was we reached out to students we lost, and we were successful in bringing them back. So there's a number out there that we've really exceeded when you look at our charter school dollars that are out there in the streets or in other buildings or per se. You know, I'd like to get those kids back, and I think, you know, it's a great time to come back to Council Rock. So those numbers you can't forget where those kids came from if we have any record of where they left from. You know, even if we put it into a separate column, what ifs they were to return, you know, in the blink of an eye, some of these sections and some of these classrooms and some of these schools it's now no longer going to be just Wrightstown and Holland, if you will. It could be something else and something else. So I always want to go the opposite way. What if? So that would just be my 2 cents on that. I'd love to have those kids back that have spent a year and a half or so, or even a couple months in charter school back in Council Rock.
I think it's important. Of course, we want all of our kids here. We want our kids here, but we have students who have gone out for whatever reason to private schools, cyber charter schools. PDE allows for private tutoring. So there are different buckets of students whose families have chosen to go for one reason or another, and we always want to welcome them back and try to encourage them to come back. We did get some from all 3 of those buckets of students last year, and hopefully we can get more for the upcoming
What would
year.
that look like if X% come back? That's kind of the thing that scares me and keeps me up a little bit.
We will not know that because dependent on their home addresses and what their home school would be. Yeah, and the grade level.
And to your point, our charter school enrollment has drastically increased in the cost. I mean, before the pandemic, you know, our charter school costs were under $1 million. Now we're approaching 3. So we've tripled. You know, and that's all charter. So brick and mortar charter and cyber charter combined. That's together. So you know, getting those students back, you know, would have an impact on our enrollment for sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Tate?
I'm just curious, Dr. Elliott, I think I know at least one district in Bucks County that does do spot redistricting on an annual basis, but which districts were you referring to?
Well, I believe the one you're referencing is probably the same one that I was referencing, that I know, you know, they'll do, particularly at the elementary level, spot redistricting, where over the summer, and I'm not at all advocating that this is what we do, but over the summer, parents will get a letter, your child's going to go to this elementary school next year instead of this one. So unlike the major redistricting that we did several years ago, which hadn't been done in nearly 20 years, which was a much more involved process, you know, this district does just that, like, okay, we need to shift some kids, and so we're going to have you go here. So it does happen, and I know Mr. Cropper could probably speak to districts across the country that do that as well. I don't know if he's.
Yeah, I'm.
Sorry, Matt.
I'm here. Yes. Yes, I'm here. You know, it's you know, it's really case by case basis, and a lot of it really depends on how much change the district is undergoing. And so, but we do see districts that do it on a more frequent basis. And of course, you want to try not to move boundaries as much. You know, you want to do it as few times as possible, and really with the focus on the individual student and the impact on the individual student, and not having them have to be impacted and moved. But it happens. It's in the own school district I live in. My kids have been moved to several schools, but it's not ideal, but sometimes it's necessary.
And it's also, and this is a good discussion, it's almost a game time decision. It's, I was thinking, like when I do evaluations, say we get your fall number through the evaluation, district level, wow, I'm almost dead on. But then I look at the home sales number and you're running like 550. I'm going, wait a minute, I shouldn't be dead on, I should be too high. And a situation like that now would say you may have gotten more of those COVID demits back this year. And then that's going to, as you mentioned, the two main factors, it's going to vary by school and it's going to vary by grade. So I say a lot of times being dead on is not necessarily a good thing if your other variables are showing either growth or decline. You know, it's so that would be, I think, a great example right there. And coming out of COVID like this, there's so many other variables out there with so much variation in them right now that you're going to have, you know, some interesting swings in different areas that you might want to keep spot redistricting in your back pocket, even if your total district numbers come in online. They may be varied by area to area, you know. Again, that ties into your facility size. It may, if it happens in an area you've got some extra space, well, it's not a problem. If you've got one where you're running a little tight, well, then it is a problem, you know. So it really almost is a game time decision.
Yes, Ms. Spillane.
So if this forecast is correct, given my
Of course
understanding.
it's correct. Dead on.
Okay.
Doubtless.
How close? So it looks
Take it
like.
to the bank. It's plus or minus 2%.
Okay. The middle
It's
schools. So go ahead.
if the assumptions hold, this should be plus or minus 2% for the life of the forecast. Okay, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact. Okay, here are factors that can cause variation in here that both we and you, the district, and the people who live there need to keep an eye on. And the biggest one, in my opinion, is existing home sales. Okay, but right after that, right now, would be a bunch of demits come back. You know, they just say, okay, we decide, and the guy did a great example, said, you're paycheck away from not being able to go to private school, or something comes up where it's not feasible for you to do virtual or do homeschool or do a charter or something like that. You know, you've got to be somewhat flexible. So what I'm kind of giving you here is this is what you should be doing. Okay, here are the factors out there that can change this as we go through time. Because I always tell people, I'm a demographer, I'm not a soothsayer. I can't see the future, you know. So, but given these variables and these factors, this is where you're going to be. And your wild card factor for your district is your aging population.
Right. So based on this forecast, it looks like middle school and high schools, we're not going to run out of capacity. But the elementary schools is a totally different story. And I don't know, based on the information that you already have, can you tell us if, according to this forecast, if we have capacity and if we need to build capacity in some of the schools? I mean, maybe Wrightstown is one, I don't know, but yep. I think the administration will probably have to answer that. I don't know if you have that information.
Up to this point,
on my side, I don't look at capacity. I just look at population. You know, that's my bailiwick.
Right. So the question was not really for
kids
you, it was for the administration, because I don't think you have that information. But
correct.
I don't know, do we have that? Can we predict capacity based on that, on this forecast? Like, for example, if we look at this forecast, can we say we're going to need 3 more classrooms in the next 5 years at, like, Richboro Elementary, for example? Can we say that, assuming that this is correct?
So you could take the estimated, the projected enrollment for each grade level, for each building, and divide that by the class size guideline number to see what's the estimated number of classrooms that we're going to need. You know, again, it would be an estimate because a lot of it depends on plus or minus, in some cases, just a couple kids, either newly registered students or students who, you know, move out or opt to go to, you know, another school, private school or charter school, or whatever, that will change the number. So at best, it's an estimate, you know, and that's something, you know, we could definitely do, but it wouldn't be something that, you know, we would necessarily want to hold to confidence of, okay, we know in 2026, we're going to need this many first grade classrooms in this building. Yeah.
There are some other variables that have to be considered as well. So you heard Sue say earlier that it's not always apples to apples. So if you take a typical 845-foot square room, which was about the size of the typical regular ed classroom, elementary, that has the cubbies in it, may have the sink in it. You could put a group of 25 first graders in there based on recommended numbers by the board. But if you have a district special ed class of 8 students, an emotional support class, an autistic support class, you will put a maximum load of 8 or 9 students in there. They're still taking up that space. They need that space, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. So it's really hard to be able to predict how many students will we have in that particular program, at that particular location, and what does that look like year to year. So I know if we were to look at some of our district special ed programs, our numbers have increased over this last year or so. So if you look at it and you try to do a one-to-one correlation and say, well, there are 4 classrooms at 25 students each, that's 100 first grade students. Well, you may need that same spot for 32 students in the same number of square footage for 32 students if they're in a district special education class.
Right, but when you try to plan for the future, and so we're talking about renovations, right? And whether we need to add classrooms, we have to make assumptions. There's no other way, and the only way to make these assumptions other than the study is to work with you and figure out, kind of estimate where we're going to be. Of course, nobody can be 100% correct, but that's the only way. There's no other way to do it.
You're absolutely right, and some of that work includes providing flexibility in terms of the space, flexible space. We know at Wrightstown right now, there are 4 small group instruction rooms. They're designed as small group instruction rooms, but there is a partition, like a door between the 2 rooms and then another divider between 2 other rooms. Well, we have that open so that we can use 2 small group instruction rooms as a full-size regular education room. So when buildings are being built, they're built with flexibility in mind. Now, it's not always perfect, as we're seeing at Wrightstown right now, because we have an issue there. And we know we, not too long ago, renovated Holland Elementary, and we have flexible spacing there as well. But, our population changes, the needs of our kids change, and it's harder to change the footprint of the building.
Other questions, comments? No, I'm looking around the table. I'm not seeing any. No. Mr. Hickey? No. Okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure that the board had opportunity. Great. So, yeah, and we'll keep our guests on the phone for public comment? Yeah, great.
Sure.
Thank you, appreciate that. And Ms. Polly, would you help me with the timer?
Yes.
Thank you. Any public comment? We'd be happy to hear from you if you'd state your name, where you're from, and we're going to time you for 3 minutes.
I'm Sarah Fear, Newtown Township. I hear the interest in having the middle school RA time switch. Though my daughter is a senior graduating, the reason why this interests me is she was one of the children singing in the Rhythm of the Rock at the last meeting. And I know that, as Dr. Senko said last month, RA was originally started for choir, for music, and I know it morphed into different things and sort of study hall, or I don't know. One thing I'm not clear on, which we don't have to discuss now, is the concept of the clinic time. I can't remember that because it's been 4 years. And I understand the idea of second chance learning, and I understand that can be a good thing. My concern, and something that I just want to make sure that people keep in mind as if you do go forward with it and want to implement it. I know it was one of the things you were doing was basing it on the Pensbury model, that they switched to the RA to the end of the day, and now they are switching it to the middle of the day because the end of the day did not work. I understand that there's the concern about kids who are in sports missing the same class, all that, and the teachers. But one thing you have to realize, there are some students who are in choir or band and also in sports, and so that's something you need to be cognizant of. And if it is switched, there has to be a lot of communication between those departments for those kids to make sure that they're not penalized in any group, because this is the time where kids should really be able to explore what they enjoy and what they want to do. So that's one of my concerns, because the choir, because mostly of COVID, they didn't have a director there very much last year. The numbers have gone down drastically in the middle school, so feeding up to the high school, we're concerned about the choir program in high school. It's one of the things that kept my daughter sort of alive in middle school and high school, is having the choir directors and choir people. So that is just some things to think about if you plan to implement that, and to really think through how it's going to work, and also for the IEPs. Even though it's an N of 1, I spoke to one student who was in the 7th grade study skills, and he said he really liked it in the morning because it really got him setting up his whole day versus in the afternoon, which again, some kids might prefer it in the afternoon. Like you said, having the time to do things with someone. So that's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to bring up, Dr. Thor, you mentioned the switching of teachers. And I do remember when Newtown Middle School opened, the new one opened up, they switched the teachers all around. So I know that my daughter's 7th or 8th grade math teacher went to pop. So anyway, there definitely was some switching.
Thank you. Anyone else on this side of the room? Seeing none. Any public comment from the other side of the room? No. Okay, any final words? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dr.